This Monday, October 9, 2023. This is our state legislative agenda and policy manual, federal policy agenda, and Pierce County policy manual and agenda study session. And we will first have our assistant to the city manager, Michael Vargas, to give us an overview, joined by Shelley Helder from Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs, our own police chief, Patrick Smith, and our city manager, Mr. Caulfield, who will review the 2023-24 state legislative agenda and policy manual. So, Mr. Vargas, I understand you're the one leading us through the agenda tonight.
Yes, and good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. Welcome to your legislative retreat. Tonight's order, we're going to review the state legislative materials with our state lobbyist, Ms. Shelley Helder, followed by our federal legislative materials by our federal lobbyist, Mr. Jake Johnston. And finally, we'll wrap up with myself reviewing the county policy materials. So with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Shelley Helder for our state review.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So, as was just stated, I'm going to review the state legislative documents. But before we do that, I want to provide a high-level overview of what we expect to happen in the 2024 state legislative session, since that'll provide some context for our discussion about the city's priorities. Then after that, I'll talk about the agenda. We'll talk about the accompanying fact sheets to each of the priorities on the draft agenda, and then we'll go through the proposed changes to the policy manual. So the 2024 state legislative session is going to be a short 60-day session. It's the second year of the biennium. The legislature's primary objective is to adopt supplemental operating, capital, and transportation budgets. The supplemental budgets are designed to just make small changes to the existing biennial budgets to account for changes in revenue projections and project or program costs. Every bill that was introduced in the 2023 session that did not pass into law is automatically reconsidered in 2024, and legislators can also introduce new bills. Democrats are going to continue to hold strong majorities in both chambers. And every member of the House and half of the Senate will be up for election in 2024. So it's going to be an election year, and that will be on legislators' minds. In general, all committee assignments will remain the same. Committee assignments and committee chairs will stay the same. The one exception to that is former Senator Christine Rolfes was the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which is also the lead Senate operating budget writer. She left her position in the legislature to serve on the Kitsap County Commission, and her role as the lead operating budget writer in the Senate was replaced by Senator June Robinson from Everett. So there's been a little bit of musical chairs replacing all the seats, all the committees she served on, but that's the most substantial change that's notable for us heading into 2024. Some of the major themes that we expect to emerge in 24 won't be too surprising. There are a lot of things that we've been hearing over the last several years. Housing, 2023 was described as the year of housing, and expect that 2024 will be another big housing discussion. I think this year it'll be more focused on policy decisions around housing, because again, it's not a budget year. Land use and development regulations. The legislature passed over a dozen bills in the 2023 session that impact land use and planning. Expect that there will be some trailer bills intending to clean up things that were had either unintended consequences or clarification that's needed. We also expect two topics that were highly discussed in the 23 session that did not advance: transit-oriented development and lot splitting. Those are the two land use bills that we are confident will return. On transportation, transportation budget writers kind of have their work cut out for them because I think every transportation project that the state has funded has substantial increase in costs. I think WashDOT estimated that projects are costing upwards of 30% more than what was appropriated. And so they're going to have to figure out how to balance their existing biennial budget. Climate and environment, it will likely be that there's many proposals changing the state's Climate Commitment Act. That's essentially Washington's cap and trade program. And because the revenue is coming in much higher than anticipated, it's the undecided what the legislature is going to do, but they'll either make changes to limit the amount of revenue that's being collected and or make decisions about where that additional revenue should be invested. Public safety is likely to return as a topic. There's going to be ongoing discussions and most likely focused on officer recruitment and retention. And finally, behavioral health. It's been said that the state's biggest fiscal challenge in this supplemental year is the state's behavioral health care system, which is under increased scrutiny as a result of the True Blood settlement. So even though 24 is going to be a short session, there's already a lot the legislature will need to address. And that is all context for our discussion this evening about what the city's priorities are. So let's move into discussing the draft legislative agenda that's in your packet. So as a reminder, the city's legislative agenda is intended to capture the city's top priorities. And you all adopt a legislative agenda to align with the state's 2-year legislative cycle. And then you amend that agenda when we're halfway through, which is where we are right now. We're halfway through the state's biennium and we're amending the city's legislative agenda to reflect what was accomplished in the first year. So the items that have been removed because they were completed were the $309,000 that was secured for the Nisqually Indian Tribe historical and cultural enrichments at Fort Steilacoom Park, $500,000 for LASA's affordable housing project, and the $621,000 for the Western State Hospital Community Partnership Program. So the remaining 2 items are policy requests around public safety and geographic equity in discharge from state facilities. I'll note that in the past, when the city has been really successful in the first year of the biennium, sometimes we consider adding new items to a legislative agenda, either because they're emerging issues that need a quick resolution or because we're wanting to lay the groundwork for the next biennium. But we're very intentionally not recommending that for this second year of the biennium because we believe that these 2 remaining items require the focus and attention not only of the city, but also of our state legislators. So I'm going to start with public safety. This is the first recommended priority. The 2023 legislature adopted several bills that impact public safety, but I'll just highlight 2 that are relevant for us right now. They adopted Senate Bill 5536, which was referred to as the Blake Fix Bill, and that clarified, created a statewide policy on possession of controlled substances. They also adopted Senate Bill 5352, which added to the list of crimes for which police can engage in a vehicular pursuit under reasonable suspicion. So these were good changes, but we believe that there's still more work that can be done. And so as I continue to describe this priority, I want to direct your attention in the packet to the fact sheet. And usually we have a 1-page document that outlines every priority that the city has. In this case, we have a first document that describes the overall priority, and then we have 3 accompanying documents that provide additional information about the status of public safety in Lakewood. And the 3 supporting documents focus on motor vehicle thefts, overdose-related deaths, and juvenile crime, all 3 of which are at increased rates over historic levels. This information that is included in those documents was compiled by Chief Smith. So I think I'll pause and put him on the spot and ask if there's anything he wants to share about the data that's included in the packets.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. So in the data, reflective of the data, we have 4 requests related to public safety. Each one of the 4 requests are based on the understanding that public safety is a shared responsibility between the state and local agencies. The state's responsibility is to provide the tools and resources for local jurisdictions who deliver those services. So the 4 requests are providing tools and resources for jurisdictions to address auto theft and property crime. The second is refinements to the restrictions on vehicular pursuits. The third is ongoing state funding for therapeutic courts. And I'll note that therapeutic courts are currently funded in the state budget, but they're funded through grant programs. And so they have no guarantee of being funded on an ongoing basis. And then the last item is a request for ongoing funding for co-responder programs, which is likened to the city's behavioral health contact team. And again, these types of programs are funded in the state's budget, but they're done so through grant programs, which are difficult for jurisdictions to then hire and retain staff when they're funded through a grant that has an end date. So those are the 4 recommended requests in light of current public safety in Lakewood. And so I am going to pause there and see if there's any questions or comments.
I do have a quick question. I'll open it up to, if someone were to ask me on the street, gee, Waylon, what do you mean by you want to make refinements to the restrictions on vehicular pursuits? What would I tell them based upon what we're advocating and what we're going to ask specifically of our legislators to do?
I think I'll take a stab at it and then I'll maybe turn it also over to Chief Smith to have him speak specifically about what the restrictions have meant. But I think in the 2023 legislature broadened the list of crimes for which an officer can engage in pursuit. And I think there's a case to be made that that list should be broadened further. I don't know, Chief, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for, is specifically what that broadening inclusionary language is going to say.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the thing that we're looking at is the total impact that it's had on our juvenile crime within the city. Our total vehicle thefts have gone up 36% just this year. And then if we just take a look at just a snapshot of our stolen vehicles, if we go back to 2018 Q1, there were 94 stolen vehicles. If we go to 2019 Q1, there were 66 stolen vehicles. If we go to Q1 in 2020, there are 81 stolen vehicles. Then when we hit 2021, it jumps up to 117 stolen vehicles. And then we go to 2022, it goes to 259 stolen vehicles just in the first quarter. And finally, in 2023 Q1, we look at 236 stolen vehicles. It's having a tremendous impact on the city. As you know, stolen vehicles impact every crime within the city of Lakewood. Just this morning, we arrested a 14-year-old child who was driving a stolen vehicle. He was involved in a hit and run traffic collision. Officers had to track him down to bring him into custody. And then when bringing him into custody, he resisted arrest and a use of force had to be used on a 14-year-old who probably should have been at home in the middle of the night. And so it's up to us in law enforcement, as well as our city, to try to contain the crime within our geographic area. And I thank every one of you here today for agreeing to go to the flock safety camera. We just started getting them up and operational. Within the first 20 minutes of putting up the cameras, we reported the first stolen vehicle on the system. We noticed and was able to track it into the town center. It was put out over the air for all of our officers. Officers then swarmed the area and there was no crime committed in that area. and we could then see that vehicle leaving our city. And so the most important thing for us is to have the tools necessary as well as the laws to support us to get the job done.
I very
And
much
so
appreciate that.
What we're asking, and I'll get to your question, what we're
Yep.
asking is just a change in the law that will allow us to have include stolen vehicles in this, in the and the ability to pursue stolen vehicles, because this is the one area of crime that touches on every crime.
So, thank you for that. So to clarify, stolen vehicles are not one of the crimes that are quote unquote allowed for vehicular or for pursuits. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that draws the link for me. Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Branstad, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess that I'm concerned that as we describe our public safety asks and we list the four of them, that we don't have a specific ask for the legislature to take a look and do some policy actions that'll have tools to reduce juvenile crime, both the occurrence of it and the incentive of it. I think that in our community, the increase in juvenile crime and the inhibitors to investigating juvenile crime, essentially the policies that have increasingly put kid gloves, if you will, on juveniles, is a policy area that I think we need the legislature to look at. And I'm concerned about juvenile crime because if we have juveniles that are recurringly getting away with things and coming of the mindset to do that, there's a more of a significant long-term negative impact on the community to do that. And so further on in the policy manual under public safety, we mention that we think the legislature should look at the policies that are contributing to the increases in the occurrences of juvenile crime. But I think from our community's perspective that same ask that's in the policy manual regarding juvenile crime should be a part of this primary ask up here as a fifth item, and maybe not even making it number 5, but perhaps making it number 3 on this list to be able to go and do that. I think a lot of people in the community are concerned about the direction that juvenile behavior is taking. And from an equity standpoint, there's also a perception that it is juveniles who are from the lower socioeconomic or disadvantaged groups that are finding their way through peer pressure and incentivize and believing that what they've been told, that the police can't really do anything to you. And that's, and many young people have specifically stated that to business owners and others that are there. And so I think we should call upon the legislature to recognize that and look at it, that they are not doing young people a favor with the policies that they put in place that some apparently felt were well-intentioned.
Well, I'm going to dig into that further because I look at the policy manual and it's got, a nice statement, but it's not very specific or measurable. Do we know, or do we have thoughts from other jurisdictions, best practices when we say Lakewood supports state policy changes and investments to reverse this pattern, the pattern being juvenile robbery in Lakewood's up, motor vehicle theft is up, assaults are up. So what specifically are we going to advocate for policy change to address the increase in juvenile crime? What specifically are we going to ask them? If I go to breakfast tomorrow and I talk to Bronski and Levitt, what am I going to ask them specifically?
One of the things that this legislative body does is when you pass an ordinance or a law, periodically there's a review to come back to see if it's working. And if it's working, that's great. If it's not working, changes need to be made. Or if it's working okay, changes need to be made. I think in this particular example, revisiting I think the law enforcement community refers to as the Juvenile Miranda Rights Bill
Right.
that was passed a couple of sessions ago. And I think that would be our ask, which is to revisit that. And I know the chief can probably speak much more in detail about what's happening with juveniles out there, but certainly that seems to be an impetus for the activity that we're seeing out there within the juvenile community. I think the other thing too to keep in mind is that, you know, this activity, illegal activity, is not representative of juveniles as a whole. It's a very, very small component. The challenge is they're doing so much damage out there that it is creating, well, first of all, it's ruining their lives.
Yeah.
Which is probably the most important thing that we need to be focused on. But it's also creating a sense of insecurity and uncertainty amongst people within their community. And I know you folks hear from the community day in and day out, and likewise I do as well, including people not feeling safe, you know, about walking through their neighborhoods or even getting
Absolutely.
their mail.
Yeah.
And again, it's attributable to some of these new laws that have gone into effect. So on the juvenile front, that would be the ask, is to revisit that and find out if it's working, because certainly from Lakewood's perspective, and I know I can speak on a number of cities here as well, it is not working.
Well, I appreciate that. Maybe I'll let Mr. Anderson speak, but I'm going to kind of dig in a little bit further. So assuming we were able to reverse course and change state law to allow the facilitation of interrogation of juveniles who are detained,
So
right?
Can I just,
then what would we do
Yeah.
with them?
so it's not so much interrogation.
Well,
In the past,
questioning. I get it. Yeah.
you know, our police officers, you know, when they would encounter a juvenile who would be in trouble,
Yeah.
particularly a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old, even a 17 or an 18-year-old,
Yeah.
there would be a conversation.
Well,
There would- and
that's a
the-
better word for it.
Yeah,
Having a
and the
conversation, I
issue,
get it.
and the issue would not escalate to a point as what the chief just described a little bit ago about what happened with a 14-year-old.
Right.
That seems to be the more common occurrence.
Mhm.
On top of that, you know, the chief reports and, you know, we hear from our officers, many a times when they do encounter juveniles,
Mhm.
the juveniles do want to have a conversation, or because they know they're in trouble and they
Right.
want to dig themselves out of that
Yeah.
hole. However, the officers have to turn their back to them and say, nope, you're going to jail or you're being
Mm-hmm. Right.
released to your parents. And so again, it just keeps that cycle of not so positive lifestyle
Right.
with that particular individual or the group of those kids.
So in addition to having a conversation, what impediments do we have in booking kids that we've had a conversation with in Reman Hall and getting adequate accountability for juveniles who are conversed with and are clearly need to be charged appropriately through the criminal justice system? What impediments are we seeing that need to be addressed through the state policy manual?
So I think I want to turn it over to the chief, but I do want to say that those are two separate distinct issues.
Yeah.
One lies in the area of our state legislature. The other lies in the realm of Pierce County within their court system with Raynham Hall. But
And then
I don't know,
maybe one of the
Chief, if you wanted
pieces,
to
I'm gonna
address
have Mr. Anderson, he had his hand up, raise the question.
Yeah, that raises a second issue. On the first issue, I think that maybe some legislation would be in order. I don't see any chance for it passing, that catch and release can't continue. You know, you get a mistake, but if someone
Mhm.
a juvenile is arrested for a crime of a certain level for a second time within a limited period of time, you don't go home to mom, you go to Raymond Hall. We have I think kind of a strange situation in Pierce County where the juvenile detention center is run by the district court, a court running a jail. What? Wait, excuse me, the Superior Court, excuse me. And then the Raymond Hall administration feels that everything should be on a family counseling basis. That's their philosophy. So you have an ingrained institutional philosophy together with an administration that, or an oversight, which is well-meaning but not trained with respect to detention and rehabilitation, and has honestly a philosophy that if you send them back to mom and dad, things will get better. And as I'm sure the chief will say, a lot of times the problem is mom and dad. You know, there's generational crime, just like there's generational poverty. And so they don't think it's a big deal. So I don't know that we're going to be able to solve it in light of the philosophy of our neighbors to the north, which is creeping down. But we might want to advocate for something that is a little more stringent on the juvenile detention side. At least take them off the street long enough that you can get them in some type of program.
Some policy enhancements to encourage accountability and opportunities for appropriate rehabilitation or something like that, I suppose. Did you have a point, Mr. Branstad, and then Chief Smith?
No, only that I think that the draft of our county policy manual is sort of silent on this as well. And there is a realm in this issue that belongs there. And so that maybe there is something, but I don't really know that significant amount about the workings of the county as to whether the court that has gotten control over the policy regarding juvenile detention, and I imagine that influences juvenile prosecution, is fixable by the county council, or is that got to be fixed in the judicial world?
Right.
That if we knew someone in the prosecuting attorney's office
Yeah,
that
that'd
could
be
take
nice.
this up for us, it would
Exactly.
be helpful. But I think we shouldn't remain silent on it in either of those two
I agree.
realms.
I agree. So it sounds like we want to add, Ms. Helder, maybe a point number 5 to the legislative agenda on public safety and articulate something with regard to enhancing tools to, effectuate appropriate accountability or opportunities for rehabilitation for juvenile crime. The chief, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're the expert. What do you think would be effective tools for us to advocate for?
Well, he used the word conversation. I would say more of intervention. Because oftentimes officers are able to have that conversation to intervene on behavior that is repeating itself. What we've done is we've taken any form of bumpers off of the juvenile. When someone starts bowling, they put the bumpers up to keep them in line, but now everything is off. And so what we're seeing is that the juveniles continue down the lines that they're on, whether it's stolen vehicles, whether it's robbery, whether it's burglary, they continue on those lines because that intervention isn't there. There's no one there to tell them no, that this isn't the appropriate thing to do. And so ultimately what we end up with is something like the juveniles who were in the stolen vehicle that ran into the truck. Now you have a citizen who's just trying to work and drive his truck, and now he's deceased. But what these two juveniles didn't know is that now they can be charged as an adult. And that was nowhere on their radar because there was no intervention in between. There was no one there to tell them no. There was no one there to stop what they were doing. And there was no conversation with the officers somewhere in the process.
I grew up in the era of scared straight and it worked, a little bit, but Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, and I have one last thought about something that we could do is that, with respect to domestic violence, we passed an ordinance and where we're very focused on domestic violence that is committed in the presence of of juveniles. But a lot of the crime reports that I read that are reported involve groups of people. And there are juveniles, but there's often an adult or a couple of adults in that group that you may attribute to doing that. And that perhaps that the legislature could look at some enhanced penalties for folks who commit crimes in groups for the adults who are bringing juveniles along this path.
Mhm. I kind of wonder, I'm sorry to be chatting too much about this, but I'll turn it over to some others, but I often wonder if a legislative party might be to somehow incentivize, address, or encourage legislation that would direct SPI to develop curriculum that would allow youth before it becomes problematic to get educated about the appropriate role of citizenship. And maybe bringing in our police officers to address maybe on a quarterly basis, modeling citizenship behavior, try to get the kids when they're younger in an educational way. And hopefully the kids that are creating problems at some point have gone to school or are going to school where they would be open to positive reinforcement and influence by a law enforcement officer who's, someone to look up to, and maybe can provide some experience when they were kids, and why doing knucklehead activity really isn't cool or whatever. But it seems to me we got to figure out a sea change approach on the education side. So that could be in itself a policy objective. I don't know why not. Education's an important thing. Thoughts? Anyone else on this particular topic? Ms. Bell, anything?
I'm definitely supportive of it, and I think it's something that needs to be added but I realize it's a huge piece of what Councilmember Branstetter said. I was trying to think about what the educational piece is. And
Educational piece. Yeah.
it's just, there's so much to that. Is there a youth board? Is there different things like that? But it's so much more. So I'm thinking, but I am definitely supportive of adding this to the agenda.
Trying to teach them before they fail the test of life.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to say that COVID has created a different twist with the youth and how they behave today as well. Before COVID, we had the Connecting Cops and Students. And that really worked really well because we were going into the schools with the police to talk to the students, and the students learned that the police were not like they see on cops, those kinds of things. And then when they turned and had the COCO with cops, the parents had to bring the student to the police department. So we had the parent and the student engaged at that period. Then COVID hit and that went by the wayside. So that may be something we can reconnect and get going again as well. Just an idea.
What do you think about adding a bullet point on education initiatives? Too creative?
No, I was thinking, just listening to you all have this conversation, I think adding a fifth bullet point, but having the language be broad enough to address both policy changes as well as perhaps more creative solutions like educational resources. I think we can craft language that captures all of that with the objective of preventing juvenile crime.
Yeah, because no one's talking about that as far as I've heard. It's how do we catch these kids when they're receptive? And that's a big if, right? How do we catch them when they're receptive or could be receptive to a different path and a different relationship? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I am learning more about this, I'm learning that a lot of the interaction of our juvenile offenders is through social media. And I don't know if there's any sort of opportunity at the legislative level to talk to the purveyors of social media, being the Facebooks, Twitters, Snapchat, all that stuff. And if there's any way to connect and prevent that sort of activity, it's something to think about. And the other thing is, if there's other municipalities that are struggling with the same thing or have been in the past, what sort of lessons learned we have from them that we can use.
The one way to reach the juveniles, especially on social media, is through public service announcement, PSAs on social media to help foster positive behavior. There are certain times that you really have a juvenile. One is when they're going up for their driver's license. They're really listening and trying to learn. And these are things that can be included at that time. Also on social media where they are. Doing the timely PSAs. I saw a great one today on texting and driving. Some of them are very successful in what they do. And finally, you have them right at that 12 to 13-year-old age. That's where they want to be a teenager, but they're not. They want to do some of the other things, but they're not. But those are great opportunities where we have an opportunity to garner their attention and also teach them the harms that they may face.
Agreed. Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, I would encourage the social media approach, because to get the message to somebody, they have to be on the receiving end, and they really aren't going to be. We're dealing with some kids that aren't going to school. We're dealing with an educational system that already has all sorts of mandates and really aren't teaching civics because they don't have time. So you're going to put something else in there. So that's the way to reach them. I was reminded, though, that Marxist theology attempted to repeal human nature. Human nature is that you respond to rewards and negative consequences of decisions. And so we can put the message out there, but I think there has to be one or both of those incentives or disincentives involved in some manner. On the texting and driving, I just say from brief anecdotal experiences that young teens really enjoyed the texting and beer goggle driving. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that. Beer goggle driving, where you put on, and texting is actually worse, beer goggle driving. And you try to go through the cones when you have this apparatus on your head, so you can't see and say, wow, I didn't realize it was that bad. Maybe at 13, and they want to drive a go-kart or something they're more impressed with than they are when they're older and think they're truly invincible. But I don't know. I don't know what those incentives are going to be, but there should be a consideration of that along with a social media push instead of a school push.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. Again, my kids are 20, 29, 25 and whatever, but so they're not doing much by the education at this point, but social media is huge.
Yeah, thank you. And I do appreciate the discussion that we've had around this. And I think Ms. Helder's view that in adding it with appropriate language would open some doors for the legislature to consider some action of theirs. We can talk about the things that are at the county level, but on the things that the chief just mentioned, the PSAs and social media things, we as a city don't have to just sit here and wring our hands. There are some things that we can do on that social media communications piece to try to reach more young people and influence some, but I think the legislature is in a position to do the most impactful policy changes to give us local tools to influence our own youth.
Well, in a nutshell, I think you've heard a lot about some sort of policy advocacy for pre-knucklehead activity, behavior avoidance, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and I think that, to Councilmember Brandstutter's point, I think that ties in well to what we're trying to say with this overall public safety request, which is it is a shared responsibility. We
Right.
need the state to do their share and local jurisdictions will do our share, but
Yeah.
you know, it has to be done jointly.
Mhm. Great. Thank you for the insight on that. So that's on the public safety piece, right? So you've added some good feedback there. The slides are very helpful, Chief. Thank you for that. Is there anything else we need to address in the public safety piece on that?
No, so what I heard from you all is I'll add a fifth request on this, and that'll be reflected both on the legislative agenda and our corresponding fact sheet regarding juvenile crime.
And then on the refinements to restrictions on vehicular pursuits, I would advocate for some specificity there, but
Yes, yes, and
Yep.
yeah, we will specify that clarification is to be able to pursue stolen vehicles.
great. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for that feedback. So moving on, the next priority on the agenda is geographic equity in discharge from state facilities. And there is also a one-page document that describes this priority in more detail. Going to back up just a little bit on this priority. In the 2022 session, the city worked with Representative Bernowski and the other members of the 28th Legislative District to request funding for Commerce to conduct a report on the availability and the geographic location of facilities that are used when an individual is discharged from a state hospital. That report was due to the legislature December of 2022. And unfortunately, it was delayed and it was not finalized until April of 2023. So it was not available for consideration during this last legislative session. But we now have the results of the report, and it's referred to as the Commerce Report or the report title, which is very lengthy, Housing Related Support for People Discharging from Long-Term Care. But with that, we can now quantify just how disproportionate Pierce County's share truly is. So I'm going to use the report because that is kind of the foundation for our priority this year. The report uses the healthcare authority's regions, not counties. In some cases, a healthcare authority region is the same as a county, as in Pierce or King, but for the most part, it's not. And services and supports, as referenced in the report, is essentially housing and the behavioral health services that may be needed by an individual. The housing, among many other types of housing, includes adult family homes. So this is all just kind of context for the report and the findings that I want to describe here. The report calculated each region's share of its overall or of the overall population of people that are discharging from state hospitals. And they did that based on the region that the individual was admitted, or as we commonly refer to it as their county of commitment. And based on that calculation, Pierce County's proportional share of long-term civil commitment patients is 10.8%. That means that 10.8% of the long-term civil commitment patients came from Pierce County and therefore should be discharged into Pierce County. So the graph that's on the one pager and the legislative agenda shows the ratio of a region's share of services and supports relative to their share of the overall population of people discharged from state hospitals. So a value of 100% indicates that a region's share of services is on par with its share of its long-term civil commitment population. So you can see on the chart, Pierce County is at 178%. So Pierce County has substantially more than its share of the proportion of the population. It also, as you can see on the graph, shows that there are 5 regions in the state that are below their proportional share. Probably the one that's most notable is the Olympic region at 49% of its share. So without investment in the services and supports, or again, the housing and behavioral health services, in these underserved regions, the regions with ample services, like Pierce County, will continue to absorb a greater share of the long-term civil commitment population when they're discharged from state hospitals. And so what this means is fair share, or as we're trying to achieve geographic equity, will not be possible until there is a concerted effort to obtain these services in the underserved regions. So all of that is laying the groundwork for what our request of the legislature, which is to procure additional services and supports in those 5 underserved regions. And we outline some proposed solutions, but ultimately we want the legislature to make the decision about how to achieve the outcome, which is geographic equity. So that's a maybe really complex explanation of this priority, but this is a complex policy request. And I think that's one of the reasons we've had difficulty making progress on it, is I think it can be somewhat daunting, but I do think that this recent Commerce report helps quantify what we have been saying with anecdotal information, and I think will help gain some traction in the legislature. So I will pause and see if there's comments or questions.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, question and comment. I think that the only thing that really is surprising about that is that Pierce County's share of commitments is lower than its percentage of the population. I would have expected it to be a little bit higher because our share of the population is about 12%. So what was King County's share of the commitments?
I have the answer to that. I was actually a little surprised generally by the regions. It didn't seem to be reflective of its overall population either. King County's is 16.5% is its regional share of their long-term civil commitment clients.
So it should take 16% of that's 16% of the state population.
Of the regional share of long-term civil commitment patients, yes.
Okay, you're gonna have to give me the elements of regional share. I was thinking proportionate to state population.
So the way that the Commerce report did it, this is based on 3 years worth of data. 3 years worth of data, individuals committed to state facilities. Where did they come from?
Right.
And so over the years 2019, 2020, 2021, 16.5% of them came from King County.
16.5% of this total commits in the state,
Correct.
not regional.
Not just
Yeah.
Western State, I think.
Correct. Yeah, not just Western State, total in the state.
So theirs are under, so there need to be a correction. To my calculation, but there's obviously we're more, but how much of that excess is coming from King County based on economics? You know, you're not going to have as many facilities in King County because real estate's more expensive, and the state to the Senate subsidizes things, subsidized based on dollars, not on percentage of cost. So there's a natural resistance from King County, both because of its political pull and the cost of providing services in real property and wages, that we would drive their percentage down unless the legislature makes a conscious effort. And so the natural place for those commits to flow is nearest to their place of commitment where there are facilities, which is us. So what do we need to advocate to the state to convince them that they should spend more money on facilities and labor in King County? Because that's where our people are coming from. That probably half or more of those that excess is coming from one way or another from King County.
Well, I guess I don't know if that is the case. On our fact sheet, under the recent examples, we have 4 examples of individuals that were being discharged from state facilities. And one was from Thurston, one was committed in Thurston, one was committed in Spokane, one was committed in Mason, and one was committed in Okanagan. So perhaps that is the case, but that's not even what our,
It's where the demand's being created. A good portion of the demand's got to come from King County. If they have, the largest number of commits and they're under their share. So, and that's naturally going to create a larger pool and we're the relief valve. So the question goes back to my question, how do we get the legislature to spend more money up there, taking the pressure off of us? It's probably a question that is answered very easily.
It's not,
No.
it's not, Councilmember, unfortunately. And so first of all, your economics is spot on. And that probably pertains to other parts of the state as well. The fact of the matter is, and I'm just going to be perfectly blunt here, for decades, Pierce County has been the dumping ground for folks that need that need a roof over their head, coming out of state facilities. And as the analysis shows, and we've been saying this, Mr. Buer has been saying this for decades since incorporation. And now we know, it's almost twice as much, in Pierce County, which of course includes Lakewood. So really the motivation should be for not just our legislators from the 28th and 29th district, but working with their delegation, their seatmates from the rest of Pierce County. Some of us remember going back a number of years, if not decades, where the Pierce County delegation came together as it relates to, for some reason, we have an overabundance of criminal jail facilities, adult family homes, and the list goes on. And now we have the data. And so I think it's incumbent. So really the ask is for the Pierce County delegation to come together to address this and work with their cohorts from other parts of the state. The challenge is going to be, if I was a legislator in, say, King County or someplace else, I'm not going to want to do this because it's going to have a detrimental impact to my community. So therein lies the rub. But again, I think the fact that we now have a report that illustrates what we've been saying for, a long, long time, I think is a good starting point. And I think, again, the ask for our legislators is to, hopefully work with their cohorts and seatmates and see what they can work out.
My point is more that there isn't an answer that is attainable, at least not in the short to medium term to get to where we'd like to be on releases. Is there some public safety subset of that we can advocate for example, at least get them to stop putting the felony flips in adult family homes in Oak Brook, which would make our community safer.
So Councilmember, here's the good news. The governor and the state legislature do have a plan. They're trying to roll out the 16-bed, not just ESFs, essential services facilities, which are for individuals that require a higher level of care 24/7, 365, as well as a higher level of security as well. The governor's plan is also, and the state legislature, and I think this is a good one, is to also roll out 16-bed civil commitment facilities throughout the state to be able to accommodate individuals who are being released, for example, in Pierce County and in Lakewood, so that they can go back to their home county, their home city, so that they can be in an environment where they can get help and assistance from family and friends along those lines. That really hasn't started yet. The kickoff is the construction of the forensics facility at Western State Hospital. And, Western State is actually in the process of moving out a number of civil commitments. Unfortunately, they're probably going into adult family homes right here in Lakewood, or they're going to other state facilities because those 16-bed facilities have yet been built. So perhaps our state legislators can build off of that as well.
Mr. Branstad, then Jess and Mr. Boki.
Well, there's a long-standing concern in our community. The legislature won't be surprised that this is still a concern. I think the fact that we're at a point of where in our list of priorities for this legislative session, there isn't there's no low-hanging fruit, which are what a dollar asks. Because so they can't just come and say, well, we got 3 of your 5, we're asking them to do something hard. I had a couple of things about the text in the one pager is that I think a reference to the progressive changes at Western State where there are going to be a significant number of civil commitment patients that have to be either released or moved over the next X number of years, highlights the fact that there needs to be a solution being worked on now, so that when that flux of things happens, it isn't that they just go. On the other side, I don't know how comfortable I am with suggesting that you can increase the number of facilities by having credential waivers for practitioners. I mean, this is an area where I think, if people are going to really get help as patients, they ought to have competent people doing that. I think it's waiving credential requirements to address that manpower shortage is less ideal than the issues of investing in the manpower pool to staff these through increased seats in the community technical college and university system in the state, and helping to do that. So I'm not quite sure that that I'm fully seeing credential waivers for providers as a way of creating a second-class level of care and with this expansion. That's my personal thought about it there.
Mr. Boki.
Couple items. So is the strategy here for the legislature to pass legislation that was similar to the one that they did several years ago for people coming out of the state penal system? So is there an actual piece of legislation written yet? And who do you see being the people to make the charge on this?
There are several different pieces of legislation that have been introduced over the years. There's nothing that has been introduced this biennium, so there would need to be a bill introduced in 2024 for it to be considered. And in terms of who a champion would be, I think that has yet to be identified.
Okay. And so John, the city manager, made mention of it, that we've had meetings with legislators. I've made comments, hey, thank you for really investing, and they've put tons of money towards building new community places throughout the state. But as the city manager mentioned, a lot of stuff just never gets built. I mean, it just seems like Commerce on their website, here's the list of stuff that we've given to people over the last, 5 biennium. And a lot of those have never opened, or even when they open, such as Well Found,
right? It takes them years and years to become fully operational. So there's a myriad of problems here, right? They don't have enough people. They don't have enough money on the local side. And that becomes the issue, right? The issue for us is these areas say, well, we don't have capacity for these guys. So it becomes self-fulfilling probably. Well, we have capacity because we have well-found. We have other operators. We've been able to get stuff built. We've got an ESF right here a few blocks away. So I'm trying to think of the overall strategy. One would be to get the law in place. But I mean, short of just saying, hey, you don't have these facilities built, we're just going to start dumping them on the street. The state has the legal right to, which of course they're not going to allow us to do. So I'm wondering about the follow through and how these things are happening. And as interest rates go up now, and so the guys who have promised big things about, hey, we're going to build this extra capacity in Snohomish County or in Clark County, how they're going to get there. And then I do specifically to the city manager's point, the state can't even get it done. I mean, I think, I don't know if they're under construction in Clark County yet. And they're fighting it like Satan in Snohomish County, which tells me Snohomish County never loses these things, right? They were smart to try to put it on tribal land to try to get around the locals up there. But is it getting built? I mean, and so I do question that based upon the performance to date, that the state really is serious. And by the way, the governor's only in office for another, less than 18 months. So on January 1st, 2025, is this even a priority anymore? Does the new governor just say, no, we got this. It's okay. I'm reversing this. So I think the foot dragging has been successful for the other localities that have been involved in this. So I think I've given you about 4 issues there, right? I think the state, you need to pass this. We need to pass this legislation of some sort that hasn't been written yet. The state needs to get its act together and say citing these is an essential public facility, and people get to cite them in other parts of the state. And the vociferous of local jurisdictions, they have to take their share. And then somehow these private guys who somehow claim and get some claim on commerce money and then sit on it hoping it'll hatch, some decisions need to be made there about maybe forcing commerce to say, hey, your time's up. If you can't get this done, we'll find somebody else to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a couple comments that I wanted to specifically mention. The Commerce Report, it talks about the various types of facilities that individuals are discharged into from state hospitals. And depending on the individual's need, it's either it's through the healthcare authority, it's through Commerce Housing, it's through DSHS. There's a long list, and actually the report does a great job of listing all the various facilities that are available. Within all of these different facilities, the majority of long-term civil commitments are discharged into adult family homes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about getting a geographic share of services and supports in other parts of the state, a big part of that is making sure that there's adult family home providers in other parts of the state. So I think a portion of the solution could be, what is it that the state can do to help adult family home businesses in other regions, in underserved regions? So I think that's
Right.
a potential item to tackle.
I was going to ask about that because in the absence of kind of what you've just said, the question from a legislator based on our policy manual might be, so what? It's kind of the taint fair. It's taint fair. We have so many, right? And so it would be kind of helpful to have, as part of this, maybe some information or data on the community impacts of this increased regional share. We got to be able to describe something as to why it's tain't fair or not appropriate for one community to get a disproportionate share of adult family homes, for instance. We know because people talk to us a lot about it, and we hear every time we go to Oak Brook or one of those neighborhood association meetings, and our retort is always the same. Gee, sorry, there's not much we, the city of Lakewood, can do about it, and here's why, and here's what we have done. But now we have an entree into perhaps doing something. But I think we got to draw, in my humble opinion, the link from what we hear from the community that it's not fair, to some data as to the impacts to the community, change in the nature of the residential neighborhoods, public safety, real impacts and concerns. We've had that before. We had it as part of the recitals to the legislature, to the litigation we filed. Something that puts some meat on the bone that then bootstraps the impact of the data we now have, which is disproportionate share. It seems to me we got to have something to say why it's important for the community. We know we have a disproportionate share, and that's why it ain't fair or it's not good.
I guess my pushback on that is it somewhat hinders our efforts in Olympia when we're saying we have a disproportionate share because we have all of these facilities. Oh, by the way, state, can you put all these facilities in all the other regions, and legislators from those other regions, can you vote for this?
Yeah, well, we're kind of asking to think about investing in other regions, aren't we? To
We
create
are,
facilities?
we
Yeah.
are. And so the message, rather than, this has negatively impacted us, is we're all about wanting to address solution or problems as a state on an equitable basis. This is inequitable.
I follow
And
your lead
so-
on that, if that's the approach, yeah.
Yeah, and so since this is inequitable, this is what we should do about it.
I know, by the way, our residents can't stand being the dumping ground and having a disproportionate percentage of adult family homes in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's disproportionate is compelling, and we have the data now to support it, not just the anecdotes.
All right, very good. Mr. Branstetter?
I think that Ms. Helder's comment that the majority of destinations for released patients are adult family homes, that in our wording of the proposed solutions, we maybe should replace the word consider and say, incentivize providers, particularly adult family home providers, in the 5 areas that are that lack services.
Yeah.
And don't give them the leeway of saying, well, we considered it,
Yeah, right.
but say actually put some incentives to having some adult family homes in Port Angeles and Coburg to that, but and specifically mention incentivizing the creation of adult family homes, not just state-owned facilities, but others.
Yeah. Some of the other jurisdictions, the land costs would be a lot cheaper, in Forks than it's going to be in Pierce County. But anyway. Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the substantial investment that the state is making in Western State Hospital, do we anticipate big influx of volume on the supply side of this for people?
So from Lakewood's perspective, what's happening down at Western State Hospital at that campus is actually a good thing. Because what's happening is there's going to be, actually there already has been a significant decrease in the number of civil commitment beds, I think about 180 or so. And then there's going to be an increase in forensics beds, which is really more like a jail, quite frankly, and it's locked down. And right now I think there's 350 forensics beds and about 550 civil commitment beds right down there. So the 350 in the forensics facility, they're essentially locked down. They don't get access out in the community. But those 550, a good number of them do. And that's part of their treatment, by the way, to transition them back. But then they end up in different parts of the community and sometimes they get in a little bit of trouble and such. But then when they're released, we do know, and we have seen it, they end up in adult family homes right here in Lakewood. And the fact of the matter is that that's not why adult family homes were created. Adult family homes were created to help people who just wanted to live in their neighborhood, but really couldn't take care of themselves. And so, and that would be, you know, perhaps an elderly person, perhaps somebody who's disabled, a young person who's disabled, who needs a little bit more help than maybe what they can get at home. But adult family homes were not meant to put for people who are coming out of a state hospital to be transitioned into an environment like that. And we have, you know, a number of examples where the result of that has been, quite frankly, very, very tragic. So that's, you know, so you have two issues. You have one, the number of adult family homes, and number two, what's going on in the adult family homes. But the reason we have a lot of adult family homes in Lakewood is because of Western State Hospital. But again, the good news is that over time, but see that this is going to happen over the next 10, 8 to 10 years. It's going to take about 5 or 6 years for the forensics facility to be completely built. And then it's taking time for those civil commitment folks to be then moved elsewhere. And right now where they're moving them is, I understand that they they being DSHS just purchased like 150 bed facility in Tukwila. And by the way, the folks in Tukwila are not happy. They actually want to have a conversation with us about what we are doing to mitigate the impacts of those types of facilities in our community. And so some of them are going there. Some of them are most likely being released, into Lakewood and into Pierce County. So this is going to continue for the foreseeable future. But as we look out 10, 15, 20 years, the number of civil commitments in Western State Hospital is going to be a fraction of what it is today. So that's what the future holds. But again, the challenges and the problems are today that need to be addressed.
Thank you. Additionally, it'd be great if we could see the data broken down to the city level instead of just county, because Lakewood may be even more disproportionately impacted than, say, Bonnie Lake or other Pierce County municipalities.
Do they have that? Yeah, I don't think they didn't do that in the report. We can see if they have it, but.
Yeah, I would think we could at least get the number of adult family homes in each city in the region pretty easily. And then the last thing, and I know it's not this simple, but could it be a matter of license quotas per county that allow these things to happen?
So the short answer is that, as those of you who were here a number of years ago, this body tried to implement, zoning and land use and regulatory authority, things such as that. And a Superior Court judge said, no, that rests solely with the state legislature and the governor. So the short answer is yes, your state legislatures could pursue regulatory tools like that, including perhaps, I don't know if a state legislature can do this, but could they put a moratorium in place, for example, that no more of these facilities be built within, the Pierce region, as an example. So.
Yeah, we've been dealing with this for a long time. And for those of you who are newer, the non-technical term for the people who are the greatest risks are felony flips. And that's someone who is referred to Western State Hospital Forensic Unit for an evaluation or rehabilitation so that they are restorative, I guess it's called, so that they can be competent enough to assist in their trial and go to trial. There comes a point when many of them are determined to be beyond the ability for benefit of that restorative care. So they can't be tried because they aren't competent, but they can't be held in a forensic facility because they're no longer a criminal defendant. So they're moved to the civil commitment side. And then at some point, I'll be cynical here, some brilliant psychologist says, it's okay for them to move on. They're good enough to go out. Then they they kill somebody with a bottle at the kitchen table in an adult family home or wander away and they're off their meds and they create a high risk. So the state's policy has been, well, we need to move these people into more secure facilities in their own community because where they came from, because that's going to be the best for them and the community as a whole, but we don't have those facilities. So Western State negotiates with adult family home providers and gives them extra money. They classify them as like they have a greater disability of some type. And they negotiate with people to place them in Oak Brook.
That's the felony flip.
That's the felony flip. So they flip from forensic unit to the civil side of Western State, where they're held in a less secure environment and they're probably a greater danger to their fellow inmates than or patients than they are to the community. But then if someone evaluates them as being stabilized or they're too old now, they really aren't we've had that happen too. They say, well, this person is geriatric, but they could still do substantial damage to grandma, who I have put in an adult family home, only put care for her. So that happens too. So what John was referring to, city manager, was the state's effort to facilitate the development of these intermediate facilities, but we don't have them now.
Well, it sounds like we're on the same sheet as best we can be on this one, right? Do what we're doing, so I don't see any major changes to the language that you've got. Unless I'm missing something, I think we're doing what we can.
Yeah, what I was hearing from this conversation is that it would be helpful to have some more specificity on the proposed solution. So I think it's worthy of some refinement to that language.
Okay.
So that's the change that I would make to the draft in front of you.
Any other thoughts or comments? Great.
Okay.
Thank you for that. It's nice to have the report finally.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to reviewing the policy manual. And as a reminder, the city's policy manual is a list of all the issues that may or may not come up during the legislative session that the city has a position on. And having these positions outlined in the policy manual allows us to more quickly engage in the legislative session. So I'm going to review the proposed changes to the existing policy manual. And if there are questions or comments as I go along, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll keep moving. So I'm going to start on page 7. The first proposed change is just updating the language on the LAHSA Affordable Housing Project to reflect the progress on that project to date.
Want to get on the right sheet of paper, so to speak? Mr. Branstetter.
So, and I read the language, but the language seems to be all historical. There isn't anything that we're asking the legislature to do in 2024 in that language. So really, to what extent is that really a policy statement? It's got a thank you sentence in it, but are we asking them to help LAHSA get over the finish line? Or, I just don't understand what we're asking this.
Yeah.
Are trying to communicate.
Statements.
I think that's a fair comment.
Councilmember Branstad, the reason we left it in here is because they ask about the project. So we want to keep it in front of them what the status is.
Okay, yeah, it just seems that something like that we would highlight it by making it the very first thing in the policy manual. Even within the area of housing and homelessness, So maybe it's a question, my concern would be the order of it. But this is where it was last time.
Correct.
Because last time we were asking for money.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And I do think it's worth having in here, even though we're not asking, because this is the second year of the biennium. The first year of the biennium, they provided funding for the project. So I do think it's worth including to give them an update on where it is now. So the next proposed change is the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners, and this is just language updating from their 23 priorities to their 2024 priorities.
So,
Mr. Boki.
so the SHAPE board just talked about their priorities for next year, so were you on that call?
I was not on that one.
Oh, okay,
No.
well, it's just got done. And so you might want to update those with SHAPE. And one of the things that came up, and I was going to bring it up later with the council, is this CHIP Act.
Mhm.
It was on the capital side that had to do with infrastructure for mobile home parks.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a push for flexibility on that to make it available for existing mobile home parks. So I chimed in and said, well, I can give you an example. And I didn't name but I said, we have a mobile home park. They had a lot of problems and they needed to put in sewers and they're expensive. And we were waiting on whether or not the park would be converted and the owner decided to go forward with it, but it's very expensive. And so the CHIP Act may be helpful to us to make those changes. Senator Trudeau was there and spoke afterwards because she had the thing and she mentioned that she thought this CHIP Act being just a law change rather than a more money behind it necessarily it was doable. So I'm just bringing that to your attention. I also volunteered that Lakewood would send people down to speak in favor of it.
Yeah, the draft language here does reference the CHIP, which is Connecting Housing to Infrastructure Program. And the language is to expand eligibility for that.
Perfect. Thank you. You see, you're so good.
She's a chip off the old block, probably.
Something like, you know.
Okay, I'll keep moving. So in your packet, the quality affordable housing item I noticed as I was going through here was struck out, but it should not have been. So that was a drafting error that will be included moving forward. On page 9, I think it's page 9 in your packet.
Oh, Mr. Branster has a question.
Well, it doesn't look like a change under the support for homelessness services. The copy that I have in my packet seems to have a word missing in the second line. It says to support low income and vulnerable. And then it looks like there's just an R.
Yeah, it's funny. I noticed that myself just today. It was in our policy manual last year. We missed it last year too. So I did make a note to correct
Can
that.
we put an appropriate word like populations or something?
I think it's
like
supposed to
persons
be-
or whoever.
Residents, probably.
Yes,
Okay.
residents. We'll make it residents. Okay, so under community and economic development, the first item is economic development tools. And we've just added in a reference to creative districts, which is another tool that the legislature has authorized. The next topic is middle housing, and there's quite a bit of new language under this section. This was language that was recommended by the community development staff. And it is essentially the effect of all this language is describing what the recent legislation impacts are on Lakewood's middle housing efforts. The next section is transit-oriented development, and this is refinement of language, again, that we had in the policy manual last year, and it's just stating the city's opposition to statewide policy that doesn't address local situations or local circumstances. Under land use authority, or sorry, local authority for land use and planning, this is similar to our statement on middle housing, but this is more broad. This is local authority for all land use and planning, not just pertaining to middle housing. It just refines the language that has existed there previously. The next section is Parks, Recreation, and Community Services. And under the Historic Fort Steilacoom section, we've updated the language to reflect the progress with DSHS over the last several months. And the objective here is to preserve Historic Fort Steilacoom. In the statement on the H-Barn renovation, we just add a phrase to clarify the purpose of the renovation is to preserve the historic structure. Under the South Puget Sound Wildlife Area, we clarify the language and ask that the state ensure that Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has appropriate funding for the maintenance that's needed at that facility.
Okay.
Under the state funding section, previously we had specific projects called out, and so we removed the references to those and just have a generic statement about our support for the state grant programs. And then we have made updates to the language on the Camp Murray boat launch improvements to reflect the progress on those conversations over the last several months. Under transportation and infrastructure, there is a new item, and that is the Clover Creek floodplain. And this is basically to put this on our legislators' radar early, that this is something the city is currently working on. There's not a specific request of the legislature, but we do anticipate that there may be some need in the future. The next change is more clarifying language under the statement around cities right of way.
Sure. Yep.
On the floodplain language, why did we word that the city will likely seek future funding? I mean, isn't that kind of a given that we're going to do that, or at least we're going to seek grant funding without specifying the sort? You know, that project is beyond the internal funding resources of the city. And, you know, I guess likely doesn't seem like a real clear word in that sentence.
I think the reason is because at this point, there hasn't been an identified solution. And so we're trying to be honest about where we are right now, which is there's nothing definitive yet.
You know, or at least say that a funding source hasn't been identified yet or something. I don't know.
We're just may see.
Yeah, just look at whether there's a better way to word that. I think it's likely that we're going to want to look for both state and federal funding to try to do that.
Would the city may seek state funding? Is that more in your mind more appropriate?
State and federal funding.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Busich was really unclear exactly where the funding stream would come from, other than that there needed to be one. But it kind of depended on what sort of funding opportunities were there that were likely to apply for. Anyway, I just didn't see that. My concern is that likely is too vague and maybe.
I can work on that language.
But I guess I'm not really sure how I would word it other than taking that sentence out.
Right.
Saying it costs 20 million and leave it at that.
Yeah. Comments?
I don't think we've made a final decision, right? We were given. Right, so I don't know that being real specific in the wording towards where we're even going on this. would likely seek funding. I don't know, because I think we have to be honest with ourselves about building a levy of umpteen tens of millions of dollars when we're protecting property when the total cost of the property isn't that much, right? And so, and they can't build on it anymore. So everything's a non-conforming use. Where we actually put the levy, I think, is another question. And the farther you build it away, the less robust it needs to be and less expensive. But on the inside, then there's properties that you may have to purchase in there, and it's probably likely that it's less expensive to purchase the properties than to build the levy, which the county has done a combination of both. They call them setback levies. They purchase properties and they build levies farther back. In the case, they're doing rivers because, and you can't dredge the rivers anymore. So they're just going to keep getting wider and wider, and flooding will be more frequent. So you just have to build, you have to allow yourself to go farther out, or allow the river to go farther out. In this case, it's a much more managed body of water, much smaller, but I think I'm fine with pretty generic language about we may in the future, but I would admit that this is out here, but that we haven't made a decision as to how we're going to go with it.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, is 2024 the right year to insert this into the policy manual? There's no real ask. We've got to flush it out some more to be able to go and do that. Probably in the 25-26, policy manual, we'll have moved along that road. We may be in a position to actually have an ask to do that, and maybe I would just sort of take it out this year.
Or you could make it generic and say, so in effect that at the estimated cost of around 20 million, this option will require funding. Instead of to say that we're going to be the ones funding it or seeking funding, perhaps, I don't know. Yeah, I think there's still concerns about direction on this a little bit, Mr. Lauricella.
Yeah, I think to me, it's a matter of what sort of strategy do we have in laying the groundwork for future requests, right? If we're putting something in as a heads up that 2 years from now, we're going to be asking, maybe that helps lay that groundwork. I'm not sure if it's, yeah.
Did you have a point, Ms. Bell?
My point was just for clarification, isn't this just in here for awareness? It's just strictly for awareness. We're not putting details around it. We're not, yeah, it's just bringing it up and saying, hey, we want to let you be aware. So, okay.
You good with the ambiguous direction?
Ambiguous direction. Yes, I think we can strike the balance of what I've heard, which is it still needs to be in here for awareness and education. We don't want to commit ourselves to a specific request, but we want to make sure that it's clear the city's not going to be doing this solo.
Right, got it. Because without a funding stream, you could be up Clover Creek without a paddle. Mr. Caulfield.
Just like to add, the other reason that it's in here is because this actually potentially negatively impacts the state of Washington with potential flooding of Interstate 5. So that's also why it's in here. To bring situational awareness on that issue.
Absolutely. Okay,
Okay, so then the next section is the I-5 South Sound corridor improvements. And there are 4 large improvement projects along I-5 that we are tracking and we're advocating for. So on the next page, we're making some clarifying changes to the 4th item, which is the I-5 Mounts Road to Tumwater and Nisqually River Delta. And the language changes here. It doesn't change the request at all. It just more clearly emphasizes that this is a really unique project that has impacts on salmon survival, treaty rights, national security, and transportation capacity. So that's the all the red that you see under that section.
Okay. One question I had on transportation generally, which led from your comment about transportation dollars, that the legislature is realizing that there are cost overruns for significant state projects. And I guess one of the questions I have, which isn't on here, doesn't necessarily have to be, is the Gravelly Thorn Interconnector Road. Is that going to be impacted by, or is that fully funded to date? But will it be impacted by the challenge with transportation monies for other projects that are underwater, so to speak?
The latest update that we have is that that project is fully funded
Okay,
and they're
great.
hoping to finish design in 2024 and build it in 2025. That's their current.
Okay, great.
And we've been having ongoing conversations with them. I think I had reported that to the council recently. So
Yep,
that's
good.
that's the recent update.
And I'll just add that that is referenced in the first item, the I-5 JBLM corridor
Mhm.
improvements. Okay, so then the next proposed change is on page 17 under the section future commercial airfields.
Got it.
And this language again is reflecting what happened in the first year of the biennium, which is that the legislature passed House Bill 1791. And that essentially disbanded and then recreated a group to identify a new site for a new commercial facility, aviation facility. The next section is finances, and we are recommending an additional topic on insurance costs. And this is in part out of recommendation from the Washington City's Insurance Authority. And this just highlights the increased insurance costs for the city of Lakewood, specifically due to increased liability risk, and asks the legislature to protect against expanding that liability in any new policies that they consider. Under city financial liability for indigent defense, we just update the county costs. I think those costs were a couple of years old, so we've updated them to reflect more current numbers.
Okay.
In the public safety section, we've done a little bit of reordering so that we have the items that we're going to be talking about more with our legislators towards the beginning of this section. When I do add in the fifth item referencing the juvenile crime that we discussed earlier, it will be added here as well. Under hiring and retention, we add in some new language to specifically call out the need for state funding for recruitment and retention. Under the vehicular pursuit section, we update the language acknowledging the work that the legislature did in 2023. And then, as was mentioned earlier this evening, there is a new section on juvenile crime. And the section on geographic equity and discharge from state facilities was updated to reflect the findings from the recent Commerce report. Yes, exactly. And the changes that we discussed on these items will be reflected in the policy manual. So moving on, the next change is under the Basic Law Enforcement Academy item, and this is just specifically referencing the wait list and the policies around how seats can be held on that wait list by jurisdictions. And the final proposed change is just under the South Sound Military and Communities Partnership section. This is to reflect SSMCP's 2024 priorities. The main change in their priorities from 23 to 24 is a broadening of one of their priorities from focusing solely on a military spouse employment, broadening that to focus on military family quality of life, which encompasses spousal employment, affordable housing or housing generally, and childcare.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I think one thing we discussed informally that I didn't catch here was a an emphasis on creating a statewide organization or state office dealing with military bases and issues as a whole.
Councilmember Anderson, you're referring to the study that's being undertaken by the Lieutenant Governor.
Well, I'm, whatever that study says, it will say, but I think our position is that we'd rather have it done on a statewide basis than have the city of Lakewood do all the heavy lifting in perpetuity.
So is it your interest to have in here a statement that there should be a cabinet level
You know,
position?
cabinet level position or a state agency or cabinet level official dealing with relationships with the federal
Federal
armed
facilities.
forces and their family and if I slide a bit, I could use AI and word it more eloquently. But
You could probably put it
the
in.
idea is at some point passing the torch and then being a key player, but not being the torch bearer.
Could be in some
Yeah.
language on the bottom of page 31. Where it says the city also believes in strong policy and financial commitments from the state in support of the statewide military affairs or cabinet level officer, something like that, right?
Yeah, yes, it has to be more, they feel they have it in the. You know, there's a misconception at the state level that by having a third level unfunded position in commerce or the tag or a DVA that does what they do well, but isn't focused on this.
As in-
that they're handling it or having a section lead that makes sure Boeing makes more airplanes for the military. But, you know, we know that there are a lot of the base impact issues that go unaddressed on a statewide level.
Does that become an SSMCP priority that we would then support, or would it be a one on our own?
I think it's on our own.
Our recommendation it would be standalone from SSMCP. It is something that SSMCP will probably be pursuing. But this has been actually a longstanding position of this council anyways. So my recommendation would be to put it under military affairs.
Okay. Very good. Well, Shelley, you're off the hook, it looks like.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Johnston.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And I guess I should say that, you know, Shelley was the warm-up. So, you know, I'm glad that we can finally get into some deep dive into the policy and the community affairs that we're working on. The federal agenda is a much briefer presentation as well as kind of a much more tailored set of activities. So if Shelley is still in earshot, which I can't see behind me, that was supposed to be a joke, Shelley. The city of Lakewood has quite simply just an unparalleled reputation with its delegation. You've got a partnership established at the federal level with both senators and your member of Congress and members of Congress beyond your constituent delegation that rely on the city for counsel and support about policy issues and about funding needs. And so part of our strategy in 24 is really to continue that reputational work and then look for opportunities to build those critical partnerships that result in policy changes that benefit the city of Lakewood and the community and result in funding opportunities that come to the city to build the infrastructure that we want to get done. And with that, that's kind of the umbrella under the rest of the agenda follows. The city has simply done an exceptional job over the last however many years in building this reputation. So for example, right now, we are the recipient of federal funds to complete the South Tacoma Way project. And one of our key deliverables next year is going to be delivering that project and doing all of the recognition work that comes with using federal funds to complete a critical infrastructure priority within the city. The city has also been supporting the LASA federal funding request that is currently pending at the federal level right now. We are in the middle of an appropriations process that, if you read the paper, you know has gone a little awry over the last week or two, but we do believe that once Congress adopts a budget for next year, we do believe the LASA money will be included in that budget. And we've got, again, all three members of your delegation on board to deliver those funds. So with that, we're looking at kind of what comes next. And really what comes next is to communicate the ongoing activities within the city that fall within the purview of federal funding opportunities. And that's both earmark opportunities, grant opportunities, and supporting our partners at the county, other nonprofits, SSMCP, et cetera. That's kind of the broad overview of what we intend to look at next year. One thing that I did miss mentioning in this list, though, is that the city in 2023 put forward a RAISE planning grant for the Green Loop project. And we were not successful in that grant application this year, but the city participated in a debrief with the United States Department of Transportation. We got some really solid feedback from USDOT, and we believe that based on that feedback, we would like to resubmit that grant in 24 and frankly address some of the areas where we fell short in that review. We feel very strongly about our competitiveness in this program and with this project. And one last thing is this is a planning grant. So this would be a RAISE planning grant for the city of Lakewood to bring that project through to a shovel-ready state. Other things that we intend to do next year at the federal level are more on the policy front. We intend to continue to partner with SSMCP and the Nisqually tribe about the ongoing conversations about what to do in I-5, what to do in the Delta. The city will continue to be an active participant in that, and federal funds and federal strategies will ultimately be a part of those solutions that have to come forward. So we are a critical catalyst in that work, and we're working collaboratively with your neighbors kind of on all sides for that project. Finally, we want to make sure that we don't squander the relationships that we've built. And I think making sure that the city continues to travel to DC at least once a year and make sure that you meet with the key members of Congress, their DC staff, their policy advisors, and key representatives in the administration is part of how we continue to bring these partnerships into fruitful results for the city. Got a few other things to talk about, but I'll take a pause here for any questions. Yeah, we get that.
Any questions? I think we're on track. Looks like.
Great. The two other things that I want to bring up that are important to us is kind of our ongoing work with the DSIP program, our ongoing work with the medium-sized cities set-aside initiatives, and finally, the North Clear Zone. And there is, frankly, progress and work being done in each of these. The DSIP program is the Defense Community Infrastructure Program. This is a program that the Pentagon funds to the tune of $100 million a year. And it's an idea that was born here in the city of Lakewood. And this is an idea that the city had many years ago at this point that eventually manifested into an infrastructure program to serve challenges that exist for military bases, but that fall outside of the military wire. And they are municipal impacts, basically. It has taken us a while to get to the point where we're at now, but right now, and I'm looking at you, Councilmember Anderson, right now the program is fully funded and fully funded for the foreseeable future. And for the first time, we have almost 100% of the DSIP funded projects are actually hard infrastructure, as opposed to some of the more service-oriented, soft support issues that have come before.
I just note that from inside the building at the Pentagon, what used to be OEA and is now old CC and ADC, that there has been a focus on getting a definition of what is intended by this. So there's guidance in prioritizing it. And it seems to have been focused on actual hard infrastructure and military value. So it's off base, but for example, a power system that provides really resiliency for the base. Or some type of, if it is a fire department, it's a fire department or a fire station in a remote place where they really need it because the base has been expanded and needs more service and didn't want to build its own. So that might make it a little hard for us. Sometimes I think Jake has said, you know, that it was born here and snatched out of the cradle when it ran away. But it's not, it migrated away from youth centers and some strange things that were happening in the first few years that were never intended by the authors. So it seems to be getting more focused.
Thank you, Councilmember. I would say that we viewed the DSIP kind of throughout the years as both like a key strategy for one of the programs that we want to make sure that we're competing within. And then as the program has morphed a little bit into what it is today, we continue to look at that program as a key evaluator for some of the hard infrastructure projects that the city of Lakewood faces. And they are infrastructure projects that would not be needed save for the impact of the base in the region. So, you know, I don't have a specific list to share with you today, but, you know, conversations internally involve the Weir, involve the boat launch at Camp Murray. I mean, there's other projects that are potentially eligible for this type of project. So it's a key part of our strategy as we look at federal grant opportunities and federal relationships. How can we bring this relationship to bear to solve the city's needs? And frankly, your delegation very much wants this program to be utilized in the state of Washington, and they want to see good projects come forward that solve problems and frankly, make the base better.
Let me ask a question, Mr. Caulfield. So, you know, luckily we've gotten the Washington Boulevard project almost done. That was our big sort of project that would have had decent funding. If we were asked by our Congresswoman, what would be a project suitable for decent funding today, what would we say?
So Mr. Johnson said really the two ones that rise to a level that I think would qualify, because again, it's got to benefit the base. If we were able to move forward with the Weir or somehow address the potential flooding or mitigate the flooding of I-5, because that has an impact of the ability of JBLM to get to and from the port.
Okay.
And having an event such as what happened down in Lewis County about 10, 20 years ago would be quite frankly catastrophic to our region. So that's one area. And the second actually could be the Camp Murray boat launch, because that is actually, it could be because it's on federal property, but it's for the benefit of the community. And so that's one that could work, though there's also, you know, the city also played an instrumental role in creating the state's version of DCIP, which is DCCA, the Defense Community Compatibility Act. So those are funding sources that could be eligible for those projects as well. So those are the ones right now that kind of come to mind.
Just a refinement on one of those. Camp Murray is actually state property, which makes it off base, which is good. And just a couple of days ago, I saw the Special Forces recovery boat going down to American Lake to launch because it had to go past Camp Murray boat launch because it wasn't sufficient to, it's a bigger boat and they can't handle it there. So
Yeah,
So actually, that's what we used to do our water jumps back in the day. That's what we used to launch our Zodiacs to pick up the guys in the water. So, and I think it's still used today. For that
might be a good
purpose.
opportunity. Yeah, services related, kind of like the other DSIP funded projects around the country.
It is unfortunate though, Mayor, getting back to your question about Washington Boulevard, because I think today, if we applied
Oh, yeah.
for DCIP, I'm pretty confident we would get something.
Mhm.
But just given the way, I think I would
Timing.
really, yeah, I'll just put, in
Yeah.
terms of how those applications were processed, I'll just leave it at that. I think we
That
would
would
treat
have
it
been a perfect
unfairly.
project. Yeah. Mr. Branstetter.
As we look at the federal policy manual, and I think back to our joint meeting with the water commissioners, where they have some concerns about the water and them having to filter it and seeing a federal source of the contaminants to being able to go and do that. And I thought from their discussions that they were looking at some sort of an ask from some federal things, and I would think that in the interest of the community's interest in water, that we would want within our policies to have something that is supportive of their efforts to secure the help that they need in various ways to do that. And if we could put some language in there to be able to go and do that, so that while it's not a city action, it's something that is impactful to Lakewood.
Yeah, that's the PFAS issue where they received, I don't know, $1 million or something to create a whole bunch of infrastructure to support the filtration for the well that's impacted by PFAS. And it's an expensive lift. So if we could put language in it, it makes sense to me that we would support Lakewood Water District's efforts, whatever they may be. We don't know right now currently. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a bad thing because it impacts the residents for sure.
Councilmember, I appreciate that. And we'll add that to the list for sure. I'm struck also just by Lakewood's history at the federal level, is that Lakewood's reputation is you bring solutions to complex problems to the federal government and you work really collaboratively with your partners. Now, that's the reputation you've earned at the federal level, and I'll leave it there. But I think that there is no reason you shouldn't support good projects coming from your community, kind of across the board, whether they're housing, whether they're transportation, whether they're water quality, whether they're climate, whether they're whatever they are. I think that the federal government is in the game right now of really providing a very diverse set of funding streams for lots of potential applicants for them. And, we need to be making these available to as many people as possible to bring as much federal support back home.
Sure. Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that up because when the first, I don't know if it was the first list, but the list came out like a year or so ago of all the earmarks. And we can say that nowadays, earmarks are
Colloquially, yes.
are cool now. And I was struck by the breadth of different items. And I thought I saw themes between what our two senators liked. But you helped me out with that because are there themes that the two senators and our congresswoman are, our congresswoman clearly is supportive of the South Tacoma Way project. But help me, in your mind, are there themes that they really gravitate towards?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. 2 points on this. The first one being strategic. Our delegation treats the opportunity to do earmarking in an extraordinarily strategic way. And what I mean by that is you're not going to see Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell on the same project too often, because they coordinate at a staff level. And if Murray's putting one forward, Cantwell's going to try to get funding for another project. They're trying to maximize the number of funds that come to the state. And so they also coordinate with their House counterparts, and they do this on a bipartisan basis. They do it with Republican members of the House, as well as kind of the two Democratic senators. And it's a stark contrast. You might think that they would all do this, but I work a little bit in Oregon as well. And like the Oregon senators, both of their names are on every project. And as a result, I don't think they get as many on a per capita basis. Like, I really respect the integrated way that our delegation approaches the idea to maximize federal investments back into our community. So it's funny, sometimes this question comes up and it's like, well, why didn't Senator Murray, put her name on this earmark? And the answer is they coordinated, and everybody was on board, and this is kind of who went first to bring it home. In terms of specific projects, the answer is yes. Everybody's got a bias in this. Everybody's got, a particular focal area that they really want to prioritize. For Congresswoman Strickland, it is assuredly housing projects, things that are affecting disproportionately disadvantaged communities. And the South Tacoma Way project was such a win for her. She is so proud of that project because 88% of the businesses impacted by that project are women and minority owned in an area of historical poverty. And it's a transformative way to complete a missing link in a project. So, I mean, that fits into her ethic and kind of her priorities as well. It's not so much like, is it transportation or is it housing, but that's kind of one of the lenses that she really looks at and evaluates. The senators are a little bit different. I would say Senator Cantwell specifically wants to be a solution to what local government needs. So from Senator Cantwell's standpoint, a lot of the positive projects that she supports are ones where cities come to her and say, here is the state of our project. Here are the partnerships that we've put in place. Here's all the work that we've done to bring the project to this point, and a federal investment of this finishes the job. And that's really compelling to her. And it's less subject area appropriate and more, this is how we build partnerships between federal and local governments in order to deliver projects. Senator Murray keeps her cards kind of close to the vest. She's the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, so she supports them all equally with full love.
Okay.
Great. Did that answer your question? Moving on, two more things that I want to talk about real quick. One is the medium-sized city set-aside. This is another policy area that the city of Lakewood's taken a really strong leadership role in historically, and there's some good progress to report. So the basic concept of this policy is that when federal grant programs are created, it's really hard for cities to compete against each other if everybody's competing in the same pool. So it's really hard for Lakewood to compete with Seattle or Tacoma or Los Angeles or Chicago if one of the metrics that the US Department of Transportation looks at is how many people would be impacted by this project. There are more people there. So it's really hard to compete. So we have lobbied for, particularly in the RAISE grant, but in other grants, to make sure that there is tiers of funding set aside so that cities compete against like cities. We have supported what we're calling a medium-sized city set-aside. Generally speaking, we're not wedded to a particular number, but it's between 10 and 75,000, 10,000 and 100,000, somewhere in that tranche, where medium-sized cities are competing with, your colleagues basically for a share of federal pools of funds. So a couple of years ago, we've been working on this with cities throughout the state and throughout the region on this initiative. And we were able to change the RAISE grant criteria so that half of all RAISE grant awards right now are made to cities under 200,000 in population size. It's not what we want. There's room for us to continue to build that number down. But the result of this was that the RAISE grant had never funded a medium-sized city project in its entire history in the state of Washington until this program changed. And then the first round of funds that came out, two medium-sized cities, Linwood and Bothell, won a RAISE grant in around $20 million each. Last year, in the second round, Shoreline won a $20 million RAISE grant. So this is now a viable funding program for us to look at. And the problem, I'm sorry, I don't want to characterize it as a problem, but the concern that I think we want to continue to communicate to the delegation is that we have created an unprecedented level of new federal grant programs through the Climate Act and through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. And these are needed kind of infrastructure programs that are doled out on a competitive basis. But again, we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to compete within these programs for these funds that are transformative for communities. So I think part of the arc that we're trying to bend here is to make sure that we get set asides based on population in all of these federal grant programs moving forward. And we, there's incremental progress being made every year. The RAISE grant is a great example of this, but our delegation's also been tracking this with us, and we've moved some members of our delegation from points of opposition to points of neutrality to points of potential support. But again, Lakewood's been a leader in this, and I'd encourage us to continue to do so. It's a critical tool for us to be able to use.
Mr. Pokey.
What kind of projects did they have that Linwood Shoreline, do you know?
Yeah, the city of Shoreline's a client of mine. I'm happy to talk to you about that project. It was a series of non-motorized connectors to the Link Light Rail transit station that's going in, including an overpass of Interstate 5.
Who's the congressperson up there in that district?
That's Congresswoman Jayapal.
Interesting. Okay. I saw another grant that came through on my day job that Pierce County was applying for, and I thought it would be good for us. And it comes out of I think the Infrastructure Act or one of those, the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't know which one. And it had to do with communities that have been separated by freeways, right?
Mhm.
And then actually the application that the county was making, it wasn't separated by a freeway, but they're making the application anyway. So I don't even know what chance they have of winning. But I thought, wow, we've got two years ago, I sat in you might have been in the room too, Don, with the then Obama administration, Department of Transportation, and they talked about their concern about areas that have become islands. We've got two. And I can't off the top of my head remember the grant. But the definition just fit into that. So yeah, they're finally out there, those grants. So I'm hoping that if we can come up with some ideas, clearly we have to think bigger if we're going to get one of those RAISE grants, so right.
We're working on it. The city applied for a RAISE planning grant last year. We're going to reapply this year, and can't count any chickens at this stage, but we got good feedback and it's a good project. One other point on this, your staff throughout the Public Works Department, throughout the city manager's office, I get to work with John and Michael and the Public Works team constantly to evaluate these grant opportunities and the projects that the city has. And there's always the tension, right, of do we want to federalize a project to go after this opportunity? That's always a question. Do we have the capacity internally to manage? There's a finite number of things that we can take on in a given year, but it's an open conversation that we always have, so that we try to be really considerate of these opportunities and competitive in the ones that make sense.
Yep.
Great. Closing this section, at least with the North Clear Zone. Once again, this is kind of a hard one to present. The North Clear Zone is a topic that we've been working on for years. And I think that once again, the city's reputation speaks to its work. Somehow the city has brought two branches of the armed services, multiple state partners, local base commanders. The city's work has been nothing short of phenomenal, creating a solution to a problem that nobody wanted to own. And we are at a stage in this solution, though, where the partners that have been signatories to the agreement on how to handle this simply aren't acting in a way that efficates the transactions that we need to do. And we are a little bit at a stage where we've done what we can. We have really batted, I think, we've batted so far above our station on this one for so long. And we've created a template for how to solve these problems. We've created a process. We've created authority and accountability within the different agencies. And at this point, it's still not working the way that we want to see it happen. And in many ways, it's our federal partners that are just slowing down the process and not being able to process the transactions that are in place. So we are having internal debates right now about, not wiping our hands of the problem. That is not our responsibility, but kind of maybe taking a different shot entirely and maybe going after all the money. And right now, the way the process has been set up is that you have to apply for funds once the transaction is under discussion. And so we are thinking about a strategy that would flip that dynamic, create money that's available to be drawn from so that transactions can be processed faster. The Army has never done anything like this. We don't know exactly how to get it done, but we're kind of thinking about, we've tried to play within the system to the best of our ability, and we're pretty frustrated at the place that we sit at this stage. And so we're looking at a different way to approach the problem.
Well, I think it's creative, but I wonder in the context of the Department of Defense and its budget and the challenges, monies for infrastructure and maintenance facilities, if they'd not see this as a zero-sum game challenge for them. That it takes away from other priorities, and this probably, obviously is not as big a priority for them as we think it should be.
Mayor, I cannot put a shrug emoji into the federal presentation, but the fact of the matter is we've also got some extraordinarily senior members of Congress who care a lot about this problem, and they recognize the leadership that the city of Lakewood's done to create a solution to this problem. We've got the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and we've got the House Chair of the Armed Services Committee, and we have an opportunity to solve this problem.
And I hear you. I would think that their brain trust would be noodling on this more than us, but go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
I think we actually overcame the fiscal hurdle. It's a bureaucratic hurdle in the Department of the Army. We can't connect A to D because B and C stand in the way. So as the Assistant Secretary of Air Force told us when we made some progress on the money, you've got to de-dork it. And so it may take legislation that instructs them to process it a different way. It isn't the actual money, it's the flow. I'm optimistic, but it's gonna, I think, I'm pessimistic about current bureaucracy making it happen. I'm a little more optimistic about getting a proviso at some point that tells them they have to do it.
Just one more maybe comment. Once again, your delegation, there's no space between the delegation and the city of Lakewood as it relates to this issue. None. Your delegation wants to see this problem solved. We are probably ahead of the delegation in terms of the feeling that we have established a process and a procedure for this to be solved, and it's up to the partners to do a better job to solve it. And I think what you're seeing this year is that the delegation is watching the inability of the agencies to process these transactions quickly and looking for ways to also, what did you say, Councilmember, de-dork the process? That again won't be found in our federal manual, but that's where we're going.
Yeah. Do we even know if there's a transaction to be had? Is there a willing seller out there?
So actually, I was just going to address that, Mayor. So going back to the larger issue of the North Clear Zone, there's a real easy solution. And the real easy solution is to appropriate the federal monies that are needed to do this, which is, $80 to $90 million. And quite frankly, at the federal level, they consider that to be budget dust. And to put it into an escrow account for the city of Lakewood to be able to draw down and use that money commensurate with best business real estate practices here in Washington State. I mean, that's the solution, and we can get it done.
Yeah.
As it relates to current projects, one of the conversations we've been having the last couple of weeks is we currently have, I think it's $1.2, $1.3 million in state and local monies available. And that would allow us to pursue a couple of properties. And so right now, since the federal government is essentially working on a continuing resolution, we don't know where they are with current funding. We are moving forward with exploring acquiring those properties again with state and local monies so that we can at least continue to show progress. And then on a parallel track, work particularly with Congresswoman Strickland's office to try and get this issue resolved.
Yeah, I'm for making purchases that are available, willing buyer, willing seller, and if we've got money available. I'm with the mayor. I go back 20 years ago in a different time. I met with an Air Force colonel who waxed poetic. He put out a map and he had lights out on 512 that were a danger to aviation and everything else. And, here we are 20 years later. And I kind of get the feeling they like it as an issue when you ask them for an issue. If you ask the uniforms, hey, well, it's a clear zone, it's a mess. But they've never really committed in my mind. I mean, here we are 20 years later, they had 2 wars that they were involved in. So that knocked them off. And I'm with the mayor. I think right now they have so many other concerns that we're not doing them a favor by asking them for $80 million to purchase real estate from people. That money really should be going to our soldiers, sailors, and airmen to help them be more ready for war or to be more prepared. I don't think it's a high priority for them. And I don't think, and I think we're always in this case of wanting it more than they want it. We have made it our priority. We've spent a lot of time on it. They haven't spent much time on it. And if it's a big deal for them, it would have been done by now. I mean, we've given them 20 years. And I think that's enough. We've done what we can do.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in inaction as a result. Yeah, for sure. Mr. Branstetter.
I believe what Mr. Oki says is correct. But I think that our continued emphasis and effort on this is well placed. That and while we are supportive of a BRAC, we're supportive of a BRAC because we believe JBLM would do well, would be a recipient of forces in a BRAC issue. But we want to be doing actions and maintaining in as many ways as possible our reputation as a strong community partner of our neighboring military installation and the people who live and work there. And continue to work on the North Clear Zone is it is an element of that because we don't want to be surprised by a future BRAC combined with a future generation of aircraft being found unsafe to operate out of McCord Field.
There'll probably be very large drones at that point where they just kind of buzz over. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I just saw a demonstration of vertical takeoff F-35 this
Exactly.
weekend. Mr. Book is right, I think, to a point, but their interest ebbs and flows. It was very heightened 40 years ago when a Delta fighter crashed by 112th Street off the end of the runway. It was heightened again a few years ago when the Navy lost a fighter into a residential area in Virginia, and just rated as the most dangerous airstrip from that standpoint in the Air Force because it was an urban environment. And you have to talk to people at a higher level than the wing here, I think, to get a true, whether either way is to get a true sense of what the Air Force thinks about it. The wing commander here is going to be concerned with getting his waiver and making sure he passes his nuclear inspection. If he doesn't get his waiver, can't do the operations, that happens. If he doesn't pass his nuclear inspection, he has no chance of getting a star. So they have a lot of operations to cover, and I would just use that no-fail mission as an example. They also can't screw up when they carry all the president's stuff around. They do a lot of different things out there that they're concerned with, and it is as long as they can get their waiver, it's a low priority to who's ever running the base. It's even lower priority on the Army side because it's Air Force. So while they'll mouth it, it's that big question in the long run is if someday, if there's a different BRAC, that's the probably worst mark that JBLM has right now, is its urbanization and that. And what does it do to the future mission, as Mr. Branstetter indicated? A new generation of what? Well, it doesn't limit the placement of a mission here when they shift. And that could have a significant economic impact to us. So it's, and frankly, as far as being advocates on behalf of the base, we are so far behind. The state of Washington is so far behind other places like Texas that spends tens of millions of dollars a year to facilitate the operation of bases that are there. That we have to have some voice if we want to maintain it. And I suggest that it's particularly good for the South Sound. If we want to maintain it, we need to show that partnership. So, yeah, it's not higher on a lot of people's list, but I think it still should be pretty high on ours until we pass the torch.
Deputy Mayor?
You know, I was just going to address Councilmember Anderson. One of the things that I find personally with the Air Force is that each new commander, they change commanders like every 2 years and sometimes every 18 months. And the new commander coming in has an agenda. And by the time it gets to what we need, they're moving on and we have a new person coming in. So it's hard to, they don't have the longevity in their leadership to make that happen. That's how I see it.
So I guess the consensus is it stays in the, the agenda, but the energy and resources we'll be watching. So, right? Anything else, Mr. Johnston? I think we got all that.
I don't know if this opinion is relevant for this conversation, but maybe just one more note on the North Clear Zone. We have done the city has done so much work to create this process for a solution to take place.
Yep.
It's taken years of time. It's taken just dozens of meetings in the Pentagon, on the base, with so many stakeholders. And we really do have a framework for it to succeed.
Mhm.
And I would maybe suggest that the oversimplification of our strategy at this point is that the solution that we've provided is a may set of languages. The parties may do the following things. And I think that we need to make it a shall statement. And I just want to change one word in our strategy from the parties may solve this problem to the parties shall solve this problem. And I think that's kind of where we're at.
Mr. Lorso?
I had a question. I don't know if this is the right forum or the right topic, but it kind of relates to BRAC, which I'm just learning a little bit about. Has there ever been an appetite by JBLM to divest any land for annexation by the city, be it base housing or anything like that?
You might be able
To
to answer this better than me.
divest.
Land, property.
Just in general.
They're not using that could benefit the city.
Yeah, Councilmember Laura Salas, so several years ago, City of Lakewood, working with SSMCP and JBLM, we embarked on what we call a land swap. An area out adjacent to the Woodbrook neighborhood. And the purpose of that was to expand the business park for logistical and manufacturing purposes for the base. However, and by the way, that was an area where the quote unquote cross base highway, which no longer exists. And really, according to JBLM, if you talk to their leadership, really never existed for them, would have been located or theoretically. And what that analysis showed is that that land out there is very, very environmentally sensitive, not just from a water standpoint, but from a habitat standpoint, as well as a number of mammals and other creatures, if you will. And so that really just kind of stopped it altogether. I know in talking with Mayor Anderson, I'm sorry, with Councilmember Anderson, there's perhaps an opportunity for JBLM to maybe divest a piece of property over off of Northgate Road for housing purposes. It would probably still be within the base, but perhaps over time it would then transition to become part of the city of Lakewood. But those are in the very, very preliminary talking areas. And again, to get to Deputy Mayor Moss's comments, these initiatives get championed by whoever the base commander is, and then they're gone in 2 years. And then for somebody else to pick it up, okay, that's all well and good, but the new base commander, she or he has different priorities. So therein lies the kind of the challenge there.
Thank you. It'd be great if we could do a land swap with the North Clear Zone, right?
Yeah, actually, we've looked at that as well, and that has not panned out. Yeah. If I could just, and I apologize if it's been said, but I just wanted to emphasize, the reason that the city of Lakewood is so focused on the North Clear Zone, and actually SSMCP from a regional standpoint, is when the last BRAC was done in 2005, that was identified as the Achilles tendon for then McChord Air Force Base. And what I mean by that is that unless that issue gets addressed, it could result in, because JBLM and McChord Airfield is really the only military installation in the continental United States that's in a very urban, suburban environment, because the area has built up around it over the last, particularly the last 30 to 40 years. That doesn't exist anywhere else. And so what's happened is that the infringement in the North Clear Zone, the Air Force looks at that as a potential impediment, and it needs to be addressed. Here's the good news. The good news is that if there was a BRAC round today, there's no doubt in my mind that JBLM would pass with flying colors for a number of reasons. But as it relates to the North Clear Zone, the reason that probably would not be an issue is because progress has been made and is being made. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that if over time the North Clear Zone is not addressed and a BRAC comes about, or it could even happen before then, the fact is that the two, right now the two main Air Force units are, the C-17s. There's an active duty and there's a reserve. And quite frankly, even the reserve one is more like it's active duty. But right now there's a C-17 on every continent on this planet. That's how important McChord Field is and the two air wings that are there. But the fact of the matter is that the Air Force could pick up those wings and they could move them. They could move them to Mountain Air Force Base. They could move them down to California. Probably not California these days, actually, because of some of the encroachment issues down there. But they could very easily move those wings someplace else. And you might not think, okay, and there's still smaller squadrons or, other units there. That's all well and good. But here's the deal. If those C-17s move, then why do you need all of the Army units? Because that's their transportation. Again, not just to go fight a war, but also to address natural disasters as well as humanitarian aid. That all comes out of there. So then over a period of, a short period of time, there could be hardly anything out at JBLM.
Yep.
And, the military will figure it out from a national security standpoint, but from a regional standpoint, we will lose a huge economic engine that has existed here in the Pacific Northwest since 1917. And I'd also just like to point out that, during economic declines, Pierce County, we do not have, our valley does not go as low as other places. And why is that? It's because we have that consistency of that economic engine of JBLM. And I know when I talk to economists here in Washington State and they write the reports, they always talk about Boeing and Amazon and Microsoft and PACCAR and this company and that company. And I always say, well, what about the federal military installations? And they go, oh, yeah. But the fact of the matter is, other than actually, if you add them all up, they are a huge, if not the largest economic engine in Washington State. And they go back to, again, the 19 teens and then into the 20s and the 30s. So they've been here for a long, long time. So that's the risk. So that's, and it all comes back to that North Clear zone. That's an Achilles.
And I hear you, and that's why we're gonna keep it on there, but here's my comment and I'll shut up. We know it's an economic risk. We've been preaching it's an economic risk. We've got the person who is fourth in line to the presidency who's been educated about it being an economic risk. We've got another senior senator who knows it's an economic risk. We've got Adam Smith, who's been educated and sits on the Armed Forces Services Committee, who knows it's an economic risk. We've got Derek Kilmer, who was on the EDB and is an advocate and knows it's an economic risk. Strickland's in our camp. If they can't get their act together collectively to make this a reality, because we all know it's an economic risk, we can't carry their water for them. All we can do is have it on the sheet. I get it, but we have been banging our head against the wall on this for years. We made progress for sure as a region, but I would hope that they similarly acknowledge and recognize that it's an economic risk for the state of Washington. Right?
Completely agree.
Yep. Okay.
I think I've reached the end of the things that I want to discuss with council. Happy to take any questions, comments, nominations for speaker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good luck with that. I think there's going to be a lot of ammunition flowing, east. Mr. Anderson.
Oh, Jake, this may be our last personal meeting. And I've worked with you a dozen years now. I want to just personally thank you for shepherding us through, and particularly me through. I've told you before, you're great. I want to say it publicly. You're a great setup guy. I don't know how many meetings I've gone into where I said, Jake, what's going to happen? What I need to know, get the elevator speech down, and it works. With one exception. One time we went to the House Republican Conference and he said, Mayor, and we met Trent Watt there. Mayor, this is yours. So you're absolutely no help there. And I don't know if there's any help for him anywhere right now. But so maybe you were just foretelling the future. But thanks again, Jake. You've been of great assistance to the city, and I really appreciated all that you taught me.
Thank you, council member. Just on a personal note, representing Lakewood has been an absolute a joy. It is so, not all of my clients work collaboratively, not all of my clients work collectively, and not all of my clients value building that reputation at the federal level to bring partnerships back home. You've got an exceptional staff that helps me with the information I need to be successful. You all work collaboratively to create an agenda. And it's an absolute pleasure. I love what we've done so far and can't wait to see what we keep doing.
Absolutely. You're a gem, Jake. We appreciate all you do and continue to do for us in the region, frankly. It's regional impacts, not just the city for sure, on many of these endeavors. So we continue to fight above our weight, as I think someone has said quite often around here. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Vargas, I think you're taking us down to the county level.
That is correct, Mayor. So I'll be starting on page 45 of your packet tonight to review the changes to the Pierce County Policy Manual.
Okay.
Just a few formatting and housekeeping items here. You'll probably notice a new look and feel to the policy material here. That's in alignment with the new city brand guide. So I'm going to skip over to page 50 of your packet to begin policy items. And I'll go ahead and go over the actual changes here. So you'll see starting with community and economic development, we've had no changes to the regional planning items as it pertains to regional planning as a whole, the Puget Sound Regional Council and the Metropolitan Planning Organization item. Moving on to the South Sound Affordable Housing Partnership. This is their 2024 legislative priorities. And it will be in alignment with the most recent set that has been adopted. Moving on to the middle housing item. This item is in alignment with the state policy item. Although there is a specific section at the bottom of the page that addresses the county specifically, just a little more wordsmithing there, in that the city also supports a dialogue with the county and other utility partners on how to address fee schedules and side sewer connections for Lakewood customers seeking to add one or more ADUs, since one of the state bills specifically address ADUs and having that be part of our land use planning. So moving on for annexations, the three items here as it relates to Arrowhead, Partridge Glen, Camp Murray, and Joint Base Lewis McChord, the urban area, those remain unchanged. Moving on to the Lakewood population allocations item. This item has been spruced up a bit. There's been a lot of action the past couple of years. Reading.
Oh, just a sec.
Yep.
Michael, Mr. Anderson had a question.
On Arrowhead Partridge Glen, in the past, we've talked about that being a possibility. If, among other things, we included the state subsidy that I call the White Center example, where there's some type of sales tax transfer to cover some of the costs to make up the divot.
That's correct, Councilmember Anderson. In order for this, there's really no, quite frankly, there's no benefit for the city to incorporate this area. The one immediate benefit would be that there's an apartment complex in Arrowhead that has some public safety issues, and our police department would probably have that squared away in a matter of months. But the two neighborhoods as a whole, there's really no benefit, because first and foremost, the infrastructure needs within there, because it's unincorporated county, not just from a road standpoint, but there are no sidewalks, and then the sewer issue. You know, the city would have to take that on. And then where do these neighborhoods fall as it compares to the rest of the city that we're currently focusing on and we've been working on for now upwards of 30 years? From an operational standpoint, it probably would generate, and you know, there's no I think there's like a gas station, but there's really no commercial area. Actually, there's a gas station and a 7-Eleven, but there's really no commercial in here. It's all residential. So we probably could make it work financially, but that would just be from an operations standpoint. There would be no free cash flow that would come out of here to address future capital needs. Again, unless the county provided a pretty significant investment over 10 years or something along those lines.
My point though is maybe we should add the provision about the county, something about a state subsidy.
Sure, we could add something in there. Yeah. The other thing too is they voted on 3 separate occasions not to be part of either the city of Lakewood or the town of Steilacoom.
Yeah, they weren't excited about it. I think it was since incorporation they voted on it, wasn't it? Yeah. Oh, Lakewood 97, yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, if there was a neighborhood group that said, gosh darn it, we're not being served very well, we really want to be incorporated into Lakewood, there would be more energy into that, I'm sure.
Also, their taxes would go up
A bit, yeah,
quite a bit.
really.
The
Okay.
one objection I do have is their free riders on any park improvements and other things that we do in our city. They're complete free riders. And so after time, their incentive is not to do anything because they're getting the benefits of what our people are paying for and
Plus they have a library down the hill.
right, and they have a library. So but mainly Fort Silicon Park improvements, which why pay? And they can walk to, right? So,
Also police protection. I mean,
and we cover their
we
budgets. on
cover that
police.
before the sheriff gets there.
So it's not really what they bring to the table, it's what they're already taking, right?
The only complaint we do is snowplow. When they need a snowplow.
As only.
Some of the seniors are now complaining because of the safety that they feel in the community, but yeah, and I get it, but it's out of our control.
I do think the statement remains correct that we're gonna support and would take it on if and only if the county extends sewer in there and expends of resources, right, to do it, or there's some grant monies, otherwise it's a complete financial loser for us. No. Well, they don't have it yet. They have sewers in there? I thought they had no sewers.
No, they don't. Some of the service areas are.
Yeah, service area, correct, yeah. So that would be,
Have stores that no longer meet code, that no one has ever hooked up to. They put the mains in the streets, but they never made a requirement for people to hook up. And they put them in like 30 years ago. And now the size of the pipes is such that it's no longer suitable.
is there any incentive for the county to expend resources to do sewers there? Are they working on this 250 unit village concept for an extension of sewer first?
No, there's no advantage, and the folks that operate the sewer utility feel that it should be pay as you go, and the pay should be on the part of the developer. They routinely reject any suggestion that even economic development is worthy of extending sewers. Where there are other jurisdictions in the country where you get curbs, gutter, sidewalks, electrical lines, and sewers and invited into town.
It's not the only place that exists.
Population allocations, you might get somewhere with that.
So I guess my question is, is the Tacoma's annexation of that area along Lakewood Drive from 75th North. There's an area that was where the county had a little piece of the property, but we're doing a street thing that's about the city, the county and the Tacoma, but Tacoma was going to annex the.
Yeah, Councilmember, they did that several years ago, if I recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
That's been a while ago. Yeah.
okay.
And it was focused primarily on the, it was focused primarily on the road.
Okay.
Back to you, Mr. Vargas.
Yeah, so moving on to the Lakewood population allocations item here, a bit more sprucing up in that Lakewood is incorporating the 2044 growth targets and HAPT, aka Housing for All planning tool, housing unit allocations as adopted by Pierce County in 22 and 23 into its land use planning. And all the language remains the same thereafter.
Okay,
Moving on to Lakewood libraries. There's been some action in this. this year, and that's reflected in the last paragraph there. So demolition of the main library site to be replaced with an interim library facility to be located at Alpharetta Street and Grandview Lake Drive is underway. Interim library is expected to open in 2024. And the city still supports the continued partnership with the Pierce County Library System to address this urgent need of a permanent and safe library in Lakewood.
Mr. Branstad.
I just like to put, insert the word adequate in that last sentence. It's, in addition to permanent, we want something that's got enough space and provide some services to be able to go and do that. Because I don't want the temporary library to someday be determined to be permanent with that half the square footage of what's there now and a third of what's needed.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Can add that in there.
Permanent sufficient.
Yeah, permanent, sufficient, and safe library spaces in Lakewood.
Yeah, I think they were still going through their legacy plan work, weren't they, to determine ultimately the size in addition to the location of the new permanent library? Have they completed that yet? Do you know? Because they were going through this whole planning process about the appropriate need, size, et cetera, before they even think about what they're doing with the new permanent library.
Yeah, we're not aware of the Pierce County Library System Board of Trustees making a decision on that. I know they're going through whatever due process they're undertaking. Right
Okay.
now, their focus is to get their interim library up and running within the early part of 2024.
Great.
So, but yeah.
Okay.
So moving on to the Community Health and Resilience section, we have the American Rescue Plan Act funds item, which remains largely unchanged, except for the fact that the city submitted and has been awarded the following sewer extension projects, the 4 of them listed there. Moving on to the Pierce County Village. This item remains largely unchanged, except to put a finer point in that the city supports county ARPA funds being allocated for the Pierce County Village to be located in Spanway, provided it is developed with sewer connections. So. And the discretionary spending of public health resources item, that is also unchanged.
Great.
Moving on to public safety. We have the first public safety item here. This is the same agenda item from the state policy materials, although it is now more geared towards addressing Pierce County leadership. So in collaboration with other Pierce County municipalities, the city requests the Pierce County Council, Pierce County Executive, Pierce County Prosecuting Attorney, and Pierce County Sheriff to support the following requests of the state legislature. And this will be updated based on our discussion earlier about this public safety item.
The only thing I would say on that is I wouldn't want to be so brash to say that it's the city's request to the state. It really, I mean, the letter that was signed by many of the cities last time was really penned by the prosecuting attorney. I don't know if we add language in there that we would certainly support, because it really is a supportive role. We're not just demanding that the prosecuting attorney support the request. She's the one who made the request to the legislature and asked us to sign on. But I suppose this is fine. But we're certainly not an island on this. Do we want to mirror the language though that we put in the state one with regard to the refinements on vehicular pursuits to include?
Yep,
Yeah, got it. Okay.
it'll reflect those changes. Moving on to geographic equity in discharge from state facilities. Yep.
So, Mr.
In the
Branstad.
public safety, in the paragraph, we have the 4 or 5 items that we want to be addressed. But the wording says, this is what we want the state legislature to do. Is there, in this portion of the policy manual, we're asking them to support the city's requests of the county. And can these be worded in other words, the first one, I think some of these can be worded the same, where we want the county to do what they can in these areas.
Especially on the behavioral
But
stuff.
I think if we could make this list, this is what our expectations is of what the county will do on their part to help with these problems. I think we talked earlier that there was a county role in juvenile crime. There's certainly a county role in doing that. That the county can play a role in funding for co-responder programs and providing funding and structure for therapeutic courts. I'm not quite sure where the county role is on vehicular pursuits, but the chief isn't here to react. But in this section here, if that list could be, this is what we want the county to look at doing what they can against these problems, instead of just reiterating what we've asked the state to do and saying that this is what we want the state to do. We're sort of letting the county off the hook.
Yep. Any other thoughts on that? Obviously, some focused comments on the juvenile crime issue to the extent the county has a role there with the jail.
Yeah, so this section could be geared towards requesting of the county. Council may choose to also include a separate item, more featuring a collaborative effort to ask Pierce County elected officials to sign on to our state legislature requests as well. Sort of splitting this into 2 may also be a direction. Put a finer point on what we're asking the county to do, because
I guess my only thing, well, yeah. Yeah. I just want us to come off as we're going it alone here. We're not.
County can have to do with the booking criteria.
Yeah.
Which is one of our public safety issues, is that we arrest people that the county has not resourced the jail, or they have procedures where they don't actually accept people that ought to be held until they at least appear before a judge. There are maybe some county level public safety things we should ask them to look at and do.
Got it. Yep, done.
Maybe Sue stern a statement for others, but I'd be comfortable with asking the county to hold repeat juvenile offenders accountable.
I'd be comfortable with that. Yeah. Provide resources, but yeah. Policies to hold.
I was just
accountable.
saying, it's very broad. What would that mean? What would that define?
Well, it's intentionally broad because there are some that don't want to do anything. And so it would be a message that we want you to move. Since we bring it up as an issue, it implies that they aren't being held accountable at this point, and something additional needs to be done. And it's more a statement of our intent as to which way the system should move than coming up with a particular program.
yeah, so that may be more geared towards, because throughout the manual, we do call upon perhaps specific county agencies to address the problem. I know that we do that with the booking restrictions and video arraignments. So maybe there is sort of a policy direction, we can urge perhaps the Riemann Hall to go towards if that would be the direction here to address juvenile crime specifically,
Mhm.
call out a specific Pierce County entity.
Yeah, a data-driven approach would hopefully reveal that, but
Believe it or not, I think there still are situations where somebody's with the wrong people, they do something stupid, they
Do it
come
over and over
home and
again.
they catch it and it doesn't happen again.
Mhm.
We can't control the parental part of it, but if they keep coming back to the system, something else has got to be done.
Very good. Next ones.
Yeah, so for the geographic equity in discharge from state facilities,
Mhm.
this is again from the aligned with the state policy manual item, although we're requesting the county to support our state legislature requests for these changes.
Okay.
Moving on, next, public safety items pertaining to adult family homes, state hospital reentry, hand services facilities, and video arraignment remain unchanged, although there is a slight change to the booking restrictions item here. In that detention has been discontinued for some arrests, including certain property crimes, even after some COVID-related restriction guidelines has been lifted. Since at the state level, COVID-19 public health emergency was declared over or ended in May of 2023 this year. So some booking restrictions still born out of the COVID-19 restriction guidelines still persist to this day.
Okay.
And the Pierce County Prosecuting Attorney's Office item remains unchanged as well.
Good.
Turning to transportation and infrastructure, the Clover Creek floodplain item. This item is the same from the state policy manual. Although this is at the end of the paragraph there, it is more geared towards the county. The city, in that the city will likely seek county funding in the coming years, as well as continued collaboration with county agencies such as the Pierce County Surface Water Management and Flood District to ensure Lakewood residents, neighboring jurisdictions, including unincorporated Pierce County communities, and the I-5 corridor are safe from this potentially devastating flood event. Some more reference towards the county there. Looking at the flood control zone district, again, this has been updated to reflect the Clover Creek project. A tiered rate may also be a funding source for a levy solution addressing the Clover Creek 100-year flood there. Moving on to the Pierce County Transportation Coordinating Committee item. This item remains largely unchanged, although except for a slight addition here at the end. The city is also appreciative of the Pierce County Regional Council forming a subcommittee to work with the Transportation Coordination Committee on holistically examining the scoring and ranking process. The city further recommends that PCRC solicit feedback from member jurisdictions on TCC's existing project selection process to include a re-examination of the process by the committee.
By the subcommittee or?
By the subcommittee. So sort of examination of the process itself, examination of the process, if you will.
What do you think, Mr. Boki? You want to re-examine what the subcommittee's examined? I think we should all re-examine what you examined.
Page 61 of the packet.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the subcommittee's process is done and now it's gone on to the committee of the whole. Right. Yeah, because if we're gonna vote on it, I'm not sure we want to include as part of our agenda, a re-examination of the process with a subcommittee when it's gonna be a fait accompli. Right?
My recommendation would be just to take it off, just to take it out,
Yeah,
just take the whole thing out.
yeah. At least that last sentence.
Actually, I would recommend just taking the whole thing out because, you know, this was on here to try and bring some
Yep.
equity to how these federal transportation dollars are allocated throughout
Yeah.
the county. And really, it was to benefit mostly the smaller cities,
Yeah,
but as well as
exactly.
getting transparency on scoring. But the fact of the matter is that as it relates to the city of Lakewood, no matter what change they make or don't make,
Right.
we're going to be fine.
I would probably leave it in, but I would end it at the sentence that ends with the city's appreciative of the PCRC forming the subcommittee to work with TCC on holistically examining the scoring and ranking process, period, and then drop the last three lines. Because that process is going to be voted on Thursday. Right? This Thursday, I think. Isn't it? Or no, next Thursday. You're right.
So,
Thursday.
so in a nutshell, sitting there for a year, going to these meetings. We have a complicated application process. We have a complicated scoring system. And there is real pride of authorship on both those.
Right.
There's people who are very proud of that it's very detailed, and I say complicated, they say detailed. And that we're seeing a really precipitous drop in the number of applications every 2 years. And so the city manager is correct. The smaller cities have to decide, you know, are we okay just not even submitting and just giving up? Because probably 4 cities were half those, right? Us, Tacoma, University Place. We're probably half the applications, I would guess, or close to half. So it really is. It's a very complicated process, and it's successfully keeping people out of the process. It's not designed to keep people out of the process, but the design of the process keeps people out. And
That's why you want to re-examine the process, right?
and you have to re-examine the process, but nobody wants to basically, it's like staff likes their process, it's their process and they like it.
Understandable to them, yeah.
And they're very proud of authorship. And there are 3 or 4 entities in the county that are just like, no, and hell no, that we're gonna make any changes to the process because it works for them.
Right.
Lakewood's in the middle, I think, on it, right? Well, I agree with the city manager. We kind of do okay, and then we don't some years.
Should we take these last 3 sentences off, or 3
So I
lines
don't
rather?
know. But
Because you've already gone through it, so I think. Yeah, did you want to say anything more than that, or we beat this horse? On the sewer utility, that's the last one it looks like here. It looks fine to me, but do we want to add something about ADU support? You know, something to the extent that the city would support flexibility in capacity or connection fee charging to promote the development of affordable housing, that kind of, something like that, because we've talked about that ad nauseum, I think. Yeah, because that's the one way you're gonna get ADUs. Well, if you don't have the hookup fees for brand new people looking to do an ADU in their lot, or at least a lower connection fee, it might be helpful for people to seriously consider it. Yeah, they're really owners.
Yeah, I could add some language there. I think we mentioned that on the middle housing item, the
Absolutely.
beginning. I think also under the ARPA funding,
Yep.
as it relates to sewer extension. So we could definitely put a finer point on that in this section as well.
Got it. And the airfield thing looks fine, right?
Airfield is good. That comes
Yep.
from the state manual.
Great.
Moving us. Skipping ahead to the Lakewood Community Center
Mhm.
item. been a bit of workshopping here. Reading the last paragraph there, currently the Lakewood Community Center houses a regional specialized recreation program supported by the city. The city is supportive of continued use of the center for this program. However, the city is moving forward with finding a new home for the Lakewood Senior Activity Center, given the building structural issues.
Okay.
And you'll see
Yeah,
that the
something like that.
historic sites.
Does that sound good to you on the community center? Okay. Yeah, the cemetery is coming to fruition, right? So we're taking that off. I think it's coming up on the city's agenda here. I thought I saw something.
It has to be surplus by the county.
Yeah.
Even though it's no money.
Mhm. That's probably fine.
Yep, so we'll cross that off there.
Got it.
As for the regional climate change efforts, there's been a bit of an addition here. As the city begins its work to comply with the House Bill 1181, which essentially adds climate change into the Growth Management Act. And as the city develops GHG emissions, reduction sub-element and a climate resiliency sub-element to the comprehensive plan, the city is supportive of collaborating with other municipalities. So to ask to multiply the benefits of this effort.
Looks good to me.
For the North Clear Zone item, that remains unchanged, and the innovative services solution. This section references our partnerships, innovative partnerships with the county. We mentioned the county ARPA funds to fund sewer extensions in the Tillicum neighborhood.
Awesome. All right. Looks good to me. Any other questions on the county, Mr. Branstetter?
I think that we're embarking on the efforts to address the opioid epidemic and things like that with the revenue that's going to start to flow to us. And while we have an agreement within the county, on the in opioid abatement things, and that the way that it is structured is that the money is all supposed to come to specific municipalities or the county to do that, and that we'll have control of that. I think some policy mentioned about that agreement be adhered to, and that any future funds that come in be handled in accordance with where that agreement goes, to be able to go on. Because I think that the county is going to be under some pressure from some sources to start to pool that money, and whether it be in the health department or some other entity to do that, to change what was initially agreed to and that we're going to initially embark on. And I think we ought to state that we want what was agreed to stay in place, going forward, and not to be renegotiated.
Do we need to add something about the opioid task force here in the policy manual?
Yeah, so we actually do mention more discretionary control over funding sources. That's under the discretionary spending of public health resources, and that currently mentions the opioid funds, but specifically at the county level.
Okay.
Although could recommend to remove that county level reference and have a new standalone opioid settlement funds item that lists more specific policy items there.
Because it says we support the use of these funds at a countywide level, right? Is that what we want to say? That is page 57. of our
57,
packet.
yep.
Yeah, last paragraph.
It's a passing reference.
So that gets at Councilmember Branstetter's comments, because the fact is that your CSAB, their recommendation is in conflict with that one sentence as it relates to sharing the opioid settlement monies, because their recommendation to you folks is going to be to make those monies available within, Lakewood.
The providers here, yeah.
That's correct, including even not getting out ahead of yourselves and just begin dispersing the monies, but hold on to them until perhaps you have a relevant project or an initiative that is going to show some real concrete results here in Lakewood. Again, rather than kind of, quite frankly, turning them over to the county.
Got
But
it.
again, that's coming from your CSAB. So I don't want to get out ahead of them as well, but you're going
So
to be
we'll
meeting with
update
them
this
in the
page,
next
that
2
looks
weeks. That's
Okay.
correct.
Very good. Does that help, Mr. Branson or Mr. Anderson first and Mr. Branson?
Yeah, I would strongly suggest that the health department's already been on a pretty active lobbying campaign
Yeah.
to gain control over funds sent countywide. And I personally believe that it would be wasted. For example, the director of health doesn't think there's any real connection between homelessness and drug use. He even advocates that position. I mean, based on interviews of drug addicts on the street. I mean, it's actually unbelievable. So I think we need to state very clearly that our policy is that the Lakewood will allocate the funds that we receive as it sees fit. And if there's a great program to join in on, make that judgment.
Yeah, we can always invest if we want to. Very good. I think that concludes. Mr. Vargas, unless you've got something else for the good of the order.
That would be all, Mayor.
Very good. Well, that concludes the items for discussion set for tonight. You see the items tentatively scheduled for the regular city council meeting on October 16. And we'll turn to reports by the city manager, Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. So looking at your calendar, what we'll try and do is all of these changes, feedback and input that we've gotten from you all, we'll bring back hopefully as part of your October 30th
Okay.
study session, because that is a fifth Monday, but again, because you're meeting today, we'll kind of move some things on your calendar. And then if council's so inclined, you could be able to take action to adopt it as part of your November 6th regular meeting. And the reason that's important is because then once you have an adopted particularly at the state level, we would then like to reach out to your state legislators on the 28th and 29th and schedule a joint meeting, the mid to latter part of November into early December, like you did last year. So that's kind of the timeline there. If I might, the only real updates I have for you this evening is just some calendar items. So this Friday, October 13th from 5 to 9 p.m. There's a Filipino American History Month. There's a youth and community summit event over at the Dr. Claudia Thomas Middle School. There's actually a ceremony from 5 to 6 p.m. and then they're going to do some breakout groups from 6 to 9 p.m. or so. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. Of course, Saturday is the pumpkin launching event, sometimes known as Truck and Tractor Day. But in my house, it is known as the pumpkin launching event. So just wanted to point that out. And that is from 12 to 3 p.m., of course, over at Fort Steilacoom Park. I've been told I can't bring a shotgun, but so that's fine. Yeah. Also on Wednesday, October 18th, the city of Lakewood and Pierce County, their community navigator team are sponsoring a Pierce County Thriving Together Small Business Resource event over at the McGavick Center, and that's from 8:30 to noon. Also on October 30th, and right now the deputy mayor and I are registered to attend. So your board member on the AWC board, Mayor Josh Penner, who was elected to that position, is hosting, a district meeting for all of the folks that are part of District 6, which includes cities and towns from both Pierce and Thurston County. And that's going to be down at AWC's headquarters. I can't remember this ever being done, quite frankly. I think that's a good thing. And so I know the deputy mayor and I will be attending, but certainly if any other member of the council, because you all get personal invites. And so it's on Monday, October 30th from 11:30 to 1. And it's down in Olympia at AWC's headquarters there. Also on November 1st from 6 to 8 p.m., we have confirmed, this is a follow-up to Mayor Whalen's roundtable discussion with all the mayors of most of the mayors of Pierce County to talk about public safety. So University Place, since they're hosting it, is going to be sending out an invitation to all the state legislators within Pierce County to come to a meeting to hear from cities and towns about their concerns about public safety. Right now, we are working on a letter that would be delivered to them in advance of that. Again, focusing on our combined regional public safety concerns. And I'm hoping, I know I gave it to the mayor earlier last week, and we want to get it out to all the cities. And so it will be a letter developed by committee, if you will. And then each city would then have an opportunity to talk about their, public safety concerns and issues. And of course, Lakewood would talk about what you talked about this evening and what we would like to see happen, but really kind of get everybody together in one room. And that will be from 6 to 8 p.m. on Wednesday, November 1st, again at University Place, City Hall. And then it is my pleasure to also announce that Bill Adamson, Colonel retired, our SSMCP program manager, has been accepted as an ADC, Association of Defense Communities, community champion. This is, quite frankly, I know Councilmember Anderson can attest to this. This is a really, really big deal for him to be recognized for the work that he has done as it relates to military affairs, but most importantly, as it relates to serving our service members and their families and representing them on our side of the fence here as the leader of SSMCP. And so we're going to recognize him at the elected officials council meeting, which is scheduled, I think it's a Thursday, November 2nd, and in the morning. So I just wanted to announce that. Say again?
He's retiring.
Stop jinxing me with my staff retiring. So he's not retiring. All right.
Okay.
People are not allowed to retire.
Exactly.
They're not. I don't know where this whole retirement thing's coming up.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, so don't, yeah, please don't jinx me. I can't, yeah. So, I hope he's not leaving.
Yeah, I hope
So-
not either.
So, yeah, him and Maria Tobin, they do a fantastic job. They're a great
Great
one-two
people.
punch. So. Yeah. So, yeah, right now I gotta figure out how to replace Dave Buer, which is gonna be near to
He's not
impossible.
retiring either.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Nobody listens to me.
Right.
But I just I just wanted to announce that because he's just been he's been not just a champion for the military, he's been a champion for the city and for our region as a whole. So. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Colvin, on the agenda for next time where the chief is going to present the third quarter police report, could you ask him to at least address the implementation of the new ordinances that we enacted regarding
Drug use.
storing in homelessness on public property and doing that and the drug use ordinance? I know it's not been a lot of time, and so there's probably not a lot of data, but we really like to sort of hear how implementation of that is going, and if there is any structural things in the ordinance that would maybe have arisen that you'd like to bring to our attention for us to address.
I don't know what kind of data he has. I know anecdotally talking with officers that it's been very helpful.
Yep.
So.
Agreed. Is that it, Mr.
that's-
Caulfield?
That is it.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
Just a comment on that last piece. I was driving, and I'll open up a council comment, but I was driving downtown Tacoma late on Friday, meaning around 5 o'clock. And I took the exit, the Portland Avenue exit, and I was taking a left on 27th to go around to Dock Street. And under that underpass there, it was horrific in terms of the homeless activity, this encampment right under, it must be I-5 or Federal or something. There was a guy sitting out there openly shooting up, and he had his, it was just really unfortunate to see the guy just kind of rocking back and forth, and then the tinfoil dropping between his fingers and whatever else he had in his hand. It's really horrible that that kind of activity is allowed, not just because of the general unseemly nature of it, but for that individual getting no treatment, obviously, right? And so I'm glad to hear anecdotally that our ordinance is having an impact and isn't allowing that, because that was just really crazy to see. Have you seen that down there by that underpass? But Portland, you take Portland Avenue and you go down, it's like you got the casinos there and you're taking a left, I think it's on 27th to go back to the Dock Street area. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard, and this could potentially benefit all cities, is the Supreme Court has decided to take up some ninth court rulings, specifically the Boise case, as well as the one out of Oregon, which has really handcuffed, local municipalities on how to, deal with,
Yeah.
homelessness and things like that. And it's quite frankly, it's a lose-lose situation because not only is the city unable to do anything,
Yeah,
then we're really not able to help them either. So,
yeah.
but it'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court decides on
Right.
that. I know a lot of cities have, submitted, amicus briefs in support of that, but that's something that we are keeping an eye on.
Yeah. I'm thankful that we don't see that kind of stuff that I saw down there. And it was shocking, frankly. Not like that. No way. Yeah,
Not like that, but I.
not like that, man. It was buzzing with activity and it wasn't healthy activity.
I was in San Francisco this weekend and compared it to a year ago, and the
Yeah.
Tenderloin's worse and the Embarcadero's
Yeah.
better, and the locals are discouraged.
Wow. Yeah.
But it is literally, there are places where you're literally stepping over bodies.
Yeah, it's just sad, incredibly sad. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Did you? Yeah, it's sad. Well, thank you, Mr. Caulfield. Let's briefly turn to council comments. Mr. Boki.
Couple of things. So I mentioned the shape thing, so that got taken care of. They did the legislative agenda. We talked about this infrastructure, the chip thing that they could extend, so that might make funds available to mobile home parks, existing mobile home parks. And I mentioned that I volunteered our services. Saturday, I went out to the Puget Sound Wildlife Refuge, also known as the Game Farm. Clover Park Rotary continues its fine work. Alan Billingsley. They had 100 volunteers. I think the majority of them were high school kids from the Clover Park School District, and they just posted on social media that they had about 50 kids there, planting native plants to try to get them to grow better and try to beat back the invasive grasses. And the place has really shaped up over the years. They've done, I think I was there for the first or second cleanup, and there were blackberries all over the place. There's still a fair amount of Scotch broom, and we were tearing out old wood fence that was almost basically just taken over by the blackberries, and all that's been cleaned up, and a new fence on a large part of it. And they've just done really an amazing job there. The trees they planted like 20 years ago, the Gary Oaks, are coming in very nicely, and they've planted more. So, there's a lot going on there. So I really do appreciate their efforts, and was really proud that there were that many people out there. So it was a good day.
Very good. Mr. Lorcella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking forward to Truck and Tractor Day on Saturday. Can they reach your house with pumpkins, Mr. Caulfield?
Yeah, we'll give it a shot.
And then a topic from earlier tonight, we talked about juvenile crime, and to me, a lot of it has to do with not having a sense of community and belonging.
Yeah.
If we don't provide that for them, they're going to find it somewhere else.
Mhm.
I saw that growing up.
Mhm.
And it's something for us to think about, how we provide community resources and community centers for people to gather in communities that are having issues, which is most of Lakewood. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brandstetter.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Bell.
I am good, Mr. Mayor.
Wow. Councilmember Anderson.
Two things. One, we currently don't have an alternate to Puget Sound Regional Council. I have probably 2 more meetings, and so be thinking
Oh,
about it.
right.
Historically, or I guess the predominant appointee by the different cities is the mayor. But that's not a requirement and it's not universally
Yeah.
followed. I just hung on. But we don't have an alternate because that was.
So it's Boki and I right now, so we need to do an
So
alternate.
we'll need both of those for next year.
Mhm.
And it occurred to me in the temporary library building. Is there any way to entice them to have a design that can be repurposed
On the interim
in the
library?
interim? Whether it's the shell, make, say,
I've been
somewhere in the
told
design,
that
not
is-
being an engineer, but you know,
Yeah.
where, how the structure is supported may limit the ability to reutilize
Yeah.
interior space for multiple purposes.
Oh, on that particular site as
on that
opposed to being
particular
moved
site.
to somewhere else? Yeah, good point.
So they might build something that we could use.
I think it's kind of modular in the way it's done. Yeah, and I think I had heard that this might be able to be, because they don't own the dirt, but it might be able to be moved to Tillicum for the Tillicum Library. And then when they build the permanent library, that'll suffice for the downtown. And then that building possibly could be moved to Tillicum. Doesn't get us a senior center, but
You know, if
We-
you think
we
you get
actually-
around all the
we actu-
roundabouts.
We
to get
actually
into the-
investigated that in the county and using the pro shop part of the temporary 18-year-old temporary facility at
Yeah.
Chambers Bay for the golf academy down
Right.
below and between the age of the building and the cost and the risk,
That's
there's no way that moving it would pay off. But this one could be different.
yeah, I think they've got plans, and we've got dirt in Tillicum. Deputy Mayor. I'm surprised you got into a fight. What happened?
I knocked them out.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Actually, I added weights to my upper body. And it was too much.
Ah, all right, very good.
Just rotate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking forward to Truck and Tractor Day. And as far as our youth, LMCC is working with school district to find some way later this year for the youth to fulfill some of their wishes and dreams, because they've been telling us what they want.
Mhm.
And so working with the superintendent, we're gonna see what we can do to make something happen for them around the holidays or sometime during that
Great.
time frame. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll keep it short, just on that particular topic on teens, youth and the superintendent. I see him at Starbucks after my gym stuff every day practically. And he was talking about how successful late night has been at the Y with their investments. And they have kept that kind of going. And I thought we had given the Y some monies through the ARPA funding for that. And so that kind of probably prompted some of it. That also prompted a conversation about teens and youth and kind of where the district has seen successes and where they have seen some opportunities for improvement and how the community kind of fits in. So he's going to chat with Mr. Caulfield about setting up down the road some sort of informal study session agenda with all of us, less formal, less agendized. The superintendent, he's going to give you a call to coordinate that. But we're having a conversation at Starbucks about youth in this particular issue. So apparently that's been successful. So in terms of events this week, I kind of got a call off the cuff to meet at Habitat for Humanity in Tillicum because the governor was showing up to Lakewood. And so with limited notice, I schlepped out there and we had a good meeting, and the Habitat people were effusive in their praise for Lakewood and the staff and all that Lakewood has done to help promote Habitat homes in Lakewood. And so with the construction of these two sort of multi-unit facilities, they will hit about 50 homes that they will have done in Lakewood since our initial work with them. And the Boat Street project is really a great project. And the governor was very excited about it and asked a lot about energy code efficiencies and the new build there. So that was good. But anyway, it was a good event and I'm glad he came to Lakewood. Well, the Habitat people were very on top of it, and they were quick to tell him that they exceeded the energy codes with their construction. So that was good. Thursday, then I appeared at the Pierce County Manufacturing Expo. That was headlined by the Economic Development Board and certainly had participation by Pierce County, the ED of Pierce County, and Becky New was there on behalf of the city of Lakewood. And it was an opportunity to feature a lot of companies that are engaged in manufacturing in Pierce County, not just Lakewood, but certainly here in Lakewood. And it also was to expose students to the opportunity for manufacturing jobs of the future. And so it was a really nice symbiotic exchange with companies in business, with students engaged and want to be in business and getting educated at Clover Park Technical School. So it was a good event. And I think it was the first that they'd put on, but they were happy to do it here in Lakewood, which is always a good sign. And then I'll see you at Truck and Tractor Day, and we'll see if we can pull back the catapult just enough to reach Mr. Caulfield's humble abode. Yeah. Yeah. I am an artillery officer by trade, Mr. Caulfield, so yeah. Exactly, yeah. Yeah. We'll be chunking the pumpkin your way, my friend. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So unless there are any further alibis for the good of the order, we were going to have a brief executive session, but in light of the hour and the fact that we haven't had a break, I am not going to call an executive session for tonight. I think we've got some work we still need to do on that. So we'll look at our next couple of Mondays, but for tonight, I'm saving you. Yeah, exactly. So we are now adjourned.